Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more from across these disunited states and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. I hope your morning is going well. Let's get into COVID news. First up, in the COVID headlines, there were more than 29,701 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 654 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of about 29,000 cases per day. That's a decrease of 36% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 38% of the American public has been fully vaccinated at this point, and 48% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,076,000 people across the United States and killed about 588,000 people. The United Kingdom has pledged its support for a new surveillance network called the Global Pandemic Radar, the purpose of which would be to track coronavirus cases and new strains, directed in part by the World Health Organization. This comes about a week and a half after the largest independent review took place, which likened COVID-19 to, quote, the 21st century's Chernobyl moment, end quote, with the independent review strongly criticizing how the World Health Organization and other sort of subsidiary organizations handled this internationally, saying that if they had acted earlier, this whole pandemic could have been prevented, even just a month earlier, which, granted, that's pretty early after the detection of this thing, but if you react quickly, we might never have seen this. Anyway, this comes as Argentina is starting a strict lockdown from Saturday on for at least a week. This comes after 39,000 new cases of COVID in Argentina recorded on Wednesday. In national political news back here in the States, Biden signed into law the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act yesterday, which received overwhelming support from both chambers of Congress. The bill will make it easier to report hate crimes at the local level. Federal investigators say they're expanding their investigation into New York Governor Andrew Cuomo from his administration's cover-up of COVID-19 deaths to his acquiring early COVID tests for use by his close family. That news comes out at the same time as it's been reported that Cuomo acquired early COVID testing for his family in the days following a media outcry over reports that he was receiving early COVID testing for his family. In other words, he got his family something he shouldn't have got them while he was coming under scrutiny for getting them exactly that when he shouldn't have got it for them. Anyway, in international news, a ceasefire was declared yesterday between Israel and Hamas. This follows almost two weeks of armed conflict in the region, and of course, decades of prolonged conflict. That ceasefire was declared with no preconditions. It has been holding for over 12 hours now, and Palestinians on social media have been sharing a hashtag claiming victory. The question for now, at least, is whether the ceasefire will hold. I hear that we have a clip from Biden. Andre, I'm going to ask you if we can please play this clip. It's a bit of a longer one, but this is what Biden has to say on it. Andre.
Folks, I've just spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Earlier today, I spoke with President al-Sisi of Egypt. Prime Minister Netanyahu informed me that Israel has agreed to a mutual unconditional ceasefire to begin in less than 2 hours. The Egyptians have now informed us that Hamas and the other groups in Gaza have also agreed. In my conversation with President Netanyahu, I commended him for the decision to bring the current hostilities to a close within less than 11 days. I also emphasized what I've said throughout this conflict. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against indiscriminate rocket attacks from Hamas and other Gaza-based terrorist groups that have taken the lives of innocent civilians in Israel. The Prime Minister also shared with me his appreciation for the Iron Dome system, which our nations developed together and which has saved lives of countless Israeli citizens, both Arab and Jew. I assured him of my full support to replenish Israel's Iron Dome system to ensure its defenses and security in the future. Over the last 11 days, I've spoken to the Prime Minister 6 times. I've also spoken with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority more than once and part of our intense diplomatic engagement. And I want to also thank the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, our National Security Advisor, and everyone on our team for their incredible efforts to bring this about, this outcome that we're about to see. You know, we've held intensive high-level discussions, hour by hour, literally. Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, and other Middle Eastern countries, with the aim of avoiding the sort of prolonged conflict we've seen in previous years when the hostilities have broken out. I extend my sincere gratitude to President al-Sisi and the senior Egyptian officials who played such a critical role in this diplomacy. I also appreciate the contributions of other parties in the region who have been engaged in working toward the end of hostilities. These hostilities have resulted in the tragic deaths of so many civilians, including children. And I send my sincere condolences to all the families, Israeli and Palestinian, who have lost loved ones, and my hope for a full recovery for the wounded. The United States committed to working with the United Nations, and we remain committed to working with the United Nations and other international stakeholders to provide rapid humanitarian assistance and to marshal international support for the people of Gaza and the Gaza reconstruction efforts. We will do this in full partnership with the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, Authority, in a manner that does not permit Hamas to simply restock its military arsenal. I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely and to enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. My administration will continue our quiet and relentless diplomacy toward that end. I believe we have a genuine opportunity to make progress, and I'm committed to working for it. I want to thank you all. May God bless you all and pray that this continues. Thank you so much.
And those were his comments. And you can hear them in full there. I'm going to finish up our headlines before we come back for comments on that. Also in international news, Britain's Justice Minister says that a review is needed on the BBC after the organization was revealed as having lied to the late Princess Diana in a successful attempt to procure a well-known interview with her, a notorious interview, by fabricating bank statements to give her the sense that she was being spied on to make her paranoid. This was to get her to do an interview with the BBC where she spoke about the problems that she was having with her husband, also, of course, royalty. Anyway, this comes as in other international news, Japan is considering freezing all aid to Myanmar over the coup government's violent response to protesters. Tokyo has long had ties to the Burmese military, although Myanmar just several days ago fired 2 diplomats in its embassy in Tokyo for rejecting the coup government's claims to power. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Jamarl, two plus big news items today, I suppose, but I'll start with the earlier one, which we heard for a while about there from Biden himself, the ceasefire. We've been talking about this for a little while. I'm just going to note, as we noted in yesterday's headlines, on the Hamas side, I believe it was the deputy head of the organization, something like that, who said that he was predicting that a ceasefire would take place within the next day.
Yeah.
He was right.
Yeah.
Just pointing that out. The no preconditions thing is a indirect contravention of what Netanyahu had said earlier, which is that, I don't know.
And what Hamas said also. I mean,
yeah.
Look, at a certain point, it's just politics, right? It's
they're just saying words.
Yeah, they stake out their position. And the thing is, if Hamas got what they wanted, where Sheikh Jarrah wasn't going to be expropriated or they weren't going to take it, then what does it mean going forward for other communities? Because at that point, that would mean Hamas had developed a deterrent to basically prevent Israel from appropriating more land. Well, clearly Israel can't accommodate that. It can't go by that. And Netanyahu would never accept that. And so it's like both end up with this kind of no preconceptions or preconditions thing where they basically stop. But it's like, this is being considered a media win for Hamas. Expensive media win for Hamas. I mean, 60 kids, 100 women and children total, something like that, or half of the people who were killed were women and children. It's expensive. But let's be clear on the positives from their standpoint or from Hamas's point of view. Nobody's talking about Abbas. Fatah has been completely undermined. The conversation that is taking place shows Hamas as being this thing that is in opposition to Israel. So it's if from the standpoint of who's fighting back, Hamas comes across as who's fighting back. And I am really curious about Palestinian polling on this. Because for all of these guys to join in a strike, in a solidarity action, Hamas has been able to unify basically East Jerusalem, all of Palestine, including Arab Palestinian, Arab Israelis, to all basically come out under one umbrella. So I'm curious on how they view this in country, like in Palestine. If you just talk to a random person, what do you think about this? What do you think about Hamas? Et cetera. By the same token, expensive infrastructure that was already dilapidated, destroyed that much more. Water that was already rough, worse. Electricity that was already bad, worse. Hospitals that were already few in number, bombed. I think it was like 7 hospitals bombed. And many of the members who were part of Hamas, especially the leadership, killed. And so, did they get what they want? Maybe, but Jesus, I mean, it's expensive. From the standpoint of Benjamin Netanyahu, what did he get out of this? That's the thing I'm more interested in. Is it purely just a wag the dog, where he can leave out of this saying, "I'm the one who protects you, I'm the one who defends you, don't put me in jail," stuff like that. It's just a very I don't know. It's unsettling.
It would be. I will put it
unsatisfying.
I find it sad and obscene, and also it makes sense. But I find it sad and obscene to be celebrating this. Like both of those things. It's like, I mean, because the standard is so low, I guess is one way to put it. If my idea of a good day, where I went out on a walk, I got beaten by a random man, I got attacked by a dog, and I found a $20 bill. And that was like, okay, that's a great day. Yeah. It would seem silly for me living right now to be like, okay, that was a good day. But I could be living certain lives and have that be a great day.
Yes.
That $20 would make a crucial difference in my happiness.
I could eat tonight.
At a certain, yeah, or I could get higher, whatever. As a certain kind of person, you're going to respond to that opportunity differently. Anyway, you get my point. Yeah. It's sad that this is being declared a victory. And of course, with the deaths, it's kind of obscene to call anything that doesn't get you immediately what it's obscene to just in general. I would argue maybe the nature of war to celebrate death and to celebrate loss and to celebrate the destruction of life. Yeah. But that's a deeper issue because, of course, people fight wars and celebrate having won them all the time, despite the massive bloodshed. That's my only, my own personal thing. But in this specific case, they just didn't get all that much. They, the decision to remove the families from the houses in Sheikh Jarrah, that got postponed, but that had happened earlier on. The thousands of rockets they fired, I don't know how much that cost, and I don't know how much that emptied out the treasuries or whatever, what portion of Hamas's money over a certain annual period they would have spent on those rockets. But that seems like it would be kind of expensive. Those weren't all that effective at actually killing people. What they did was frighten people, which I guess is their main purpose. Yeah. But no, it's all frustrating. Anyway, and then there's the other story this morning, the BBC one.
One thing to keep in mind,
What's up?
Depending upon the position that you're in, though, that might be all you can get out of it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, Hamas is not in a position where it's like we're going to kick Israel out of.
Yeah, and if I wanted to spin it the other way, I could try to look at it from Lath's perspective and be like, everybody here responded pretty much as one, whether you're talking about the strike or you're talking about the fact that they got this ceasefire into place pretty quickly after Hamas was the group to say that they would be doing that. Well, it shows that they're getting a little bit of power. It wasn't as much of an onslaught as you might have expected from Israel.
Yeah.
And certainly that Israel is technically capable of. But the question at this point is, would there be enough media pushback to keep them from doing that? You know what I mean? And in Hamas's eyes, this was a PR victory. But that is the part that makes it, coming back to it, that's the part that makes it feel truly obscene. That this would be a PR victory, and that would be considered a victory, despite the
loss of life,
loss of all of those lives,
all that stuff.
Yeah.
I guess the thing is, the problem is that the land is being taken, they're being killed and put in prison anyway. And if you're in that mindset, then you may look as obscene as it comes across as like, geez, 63 children died.
Yeah.
217 people total, 12 Israelis. And so it's like that skew is dramatic. By the same token,
I hear you.
From their take, that might be, in their take, a win. But that gets across how the conditions that they're in order to even consider this a win. And again, it's like a win in what context? I mean, we're still in an apartheid state. So it's like we've stopped firing at each other with the conditions exactly the way they were.
I hear you. So, wait, Jamarl, we've got a choice right here, and I'll pitch it to you live. I'm open. We can either go directly into the break right now and come back in your soapbox segment, or we can try to get into the BBC story. But we're now past time. My only thing there is
let's go into the BBC story because that one is interesting.
Okay, too. It is interesting because here's the thing. Here's how I'll start my side off. I was I think 4 when this interview aired. I think this was in 1996. I was born in.
I was at a chess tournament when this was taking place.
There you go.
well, not with the interview. When Princess Diana died, we were at a chess tournament.
I think it's a cultural memory, obviously, that has become almost a generational gap where I was not really conscious as a person at the time that all this stuff was going down. And so I've heard about it, and it seems dramatic. And I heard, Princess Diana was killed and these different things. And I know some of the history, but
paparazzi's chasing her and all this other stuff.
Yeah. She was that kind of celebrity media figure at the same time as a member of the royalty and a like member of the royalty and a lot more, a kind of person you could associate yourself with and identify with to a much greater degree than so much of the other members of the royalty.
Detached. Yeah, they just seem untouchable.
What was this like? What was her reception like?
So, Prince, it's very weird. Martin Bashir, when I remember Princess Diana, this was when I was maybe 15, 16, 17. I mean, I was on my way out of school at that point. And I just remember at a chess tournament, I remember coming back to the room. My mom said, Princess Diana has been killed. She's dead. And, it wasn't, it's Britain, but she was very well known. And like you say, very well liked in regards to her ability to kind of reach people, connect with people in a way that the other royalty just wasn't. That interview with Martin Bashir, I was telling you earlier today, I remember Martin Bashir from MSNBC, and that's where a lot of people may remember him from. And Martin Bashir got in trouble on MSNBC when Sarah Palin made this joke about slavery or said something about slavery, like, oh, it wasn't as bad as people said, something to that effect. Oh, that was her illusion. And Bashir was giving this allegory or this example of the situation where a slave master basically defecated in somebody's mouth. Bashir says somebody should take a dump in Sarah Palin's mouth. Now, within a day, funny, MSNBC didn't think so. And they had some very strong feelings about that. They took him off the air. And I can't remember if he got fired for that or if that was kind of just the end, like the downfall. But in the U.S., that's where I remember Bashir from. I did not know that he was the guy that got this interview and then lied to do it. And then basically pretended as if she was being spied on and forging records to show, saying, hey.
If it were just him fabricating documents, it's like I'm willing to let a little bit slide because he's hustling or whatever. He's like just really trying to get,
he's trying to get that story.
To induce paranoia and to take somebody who's already in a kind of screwed up mental position. I'll put it like this, going into it that just who they are, like literally like the high profile, they're probably going to be a little bit weird upstairs based on having to deal with all of the awareness of how the public feels about them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like constant knowledge.
It's a constant knowledge. And then to know that they're also going through some drama in their marriage.
She's been cheated on.
Yeah. And then to throw in an outright lie that you're kind of in a position to, I guess, have the ability to predict. Be sick, and
the BBC knew, and
that's the
it.
part where, and
the BBC knew,
and that's the part where they should come under some serious scrutiny and punishments. It's not too late. That's
because from Bashir's standpoint, I want to get this interview. It's Princess Di.
Yeah.
I want to get this interview, and I think we have this weird, and I think I do get it on some level. As human beings, we are not accustomed to this. We deal with people almost in this kind of individual level. And we have this kind of new society where somebody can be a celeb where tens of millions of people would know that person. Under normal circumstances, that doesn't happen. In fact, that doesn't happen without some kind of technological medium. But the moment that happens and that person is aware that all of those people out there are aware that they have an image and that image need to be shaped and manicured, on some level, I don't even think that we look at them as human, if that makes sense. Like we look at them as almost items or a name. Like when somebody says Princess died, they think about her as a human being, or they think about her as an icon.
Well, it's easy enough to do to objectify people
Yeah.
when you just switch into a certain mode of thinking.
Especially when you see him somewhere,
Yeah.
like on TV or on
Well,
radio.
and then you combine that with the idea that Andy Warhol, everybody's going to have their 15 minutes of fame, and with the internet, the fact that anybody could go viral or could become the subject of a woke culture war witch hunt at any point, and suddenly have everybody's eyes on them, at least in whatever community they're occupying. Yeah, it's everywhere these days, and the fear of that has grown. And you're right about the technology for celebrities, but it's like everybody's become a lot of people have become potential celebrities and actual celebrities just within their own niche subculture, wherever. And so more people are experiencing that kind of weird paranoia. Anyway, we need to go to a break.
Yeah.
I'm glad we hit that story, though, because it's an interesting one. We'll be coming back on it later on in the show. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side in our soapbox segment with Jamarl's monologue and our short back and forth. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. And if you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We were having a conversation yesterday about Lori Lightfoot, and I saw this in the paper when I was on the train. I think it was a day or so ago, and we were talking about it yesterday. And this, even though I understand what Lori is trying to accomplish, bad play. Bad play. So Mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago, as you know, there's a huge crime issue in Chicago, especially with the number of people being killed in Chicago. Lori Lightfoot was also in this teachers' fight with the teachers' union about whether or not to send people back to school and when to send people back to school in the context of COVID. And now, going on her 2-year mark in office, she is making a decision to grant interviews for only journalists of color, saying it was intended to confront the issue of what she described as mostly white and male City Hall press corps. Now, this is problematic on so many levels, right? At the end of the day, I can see on some level if you say, in order to make up against racial biases and injustice, I'm going to give deference and give a bias towards giving an interview to people of color. If you want to do it that way, fair enough. But you can't come out. I suppose you could, but it does not look good, nor is it going to be tolerated for you to come out and basically say, I am only giving interviews to people of color. And you have this weird situation where there were people of color who actually tried to get those interviews and still couldn't get those interviews. Lightfoot made a point of saying that, the people who are working with her or the people who are coming in as reporters, they were predominantly white. That is true, but not all of them are. Not all of them are. And whether all of them are or not is almost secondary to the point that you're making this explicitly racial litmus test. What about the other reporters? What about the other people who want information, who may have better questions, who may not ask questions in a particular way? How, as mayor, when you are mayor of everybody in the city, that you're going to basically say a sect, a group, a portion will not get my attention. I understand why she's doing it. And I applaud her for trying to deal with issues of injustice. I applaud her for trying to balance certain levels of scales of what she considered to be unfairness or inequity. Fair enough. I accept your premise. I accept what you're trying to do, but this is a failure in doing it. Your city has all sorts of problems. Chicago is in a difficult spot. And the various people who are going to ask you questions, yes, it's fair to say that there's nothing wrong with trying to incentivize people of color to ask you questions and become reporters and et cetera, and allow those people to be in the room and not exclude it from the room. But this seems folly to basically say you're only going to grant them to reporters of color. I get what you're trying to do, but this is a failure. Shane, what are your thoughts? This just seems like a publicity stunt. I mean, it doesn't make up for past injustice. It doesn't make up for past racial stuff. Even if you had 10 black reporters, that doesn't stop you from giving press to white reporters or, other demographics. Meaning there is no situation where she needs to be in this situation. She's creating the standard. If you wanted to give deference to reporters of color, do that. But it's a different standard of saying, not only am I going to give deference to reporters of color, I'm just not going to allow white reporters. It's just very strange. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily make up for anything. And in the context of this, it comes across as a publicity stunt. Applause for thought, boos for instantiation or carrying it through. What are your thoughts on this? This seems off.
Well, it's racist. I wonder how much of the woke left supports it, though.
That's the interesting part. I would wager that a lot of them might. I was at a group one time. It was at what is it called? For Peace. It was something for Peace. And all of us were there. All of the people were there. Large number of the woke left is there. And when people are getting in the line, somebody stepped out of the line. I think it was a white woman who said, all of the white people should get in the back of the line to allow people of color to go first. And of course, the black people are like, what the hell is wrong with this woman? Like, what are you talking about? Like, everybody is getting in a line. No, like, people, this theater doesn't fix this kind of systemic stuff. And so I get her doing this. And if she wants to say, I want to draw attention to it, okay, fair enough. But this just seems like a horrible, horrible way to go about it.
Little did you know it was all intense performance art meant to get you to introspect on what racism really is in modern society.
Is that what it was? Oh, she's 15-dimensional chess.
That's what it actually is. She's unaware of it. Yeah, she's acting things out. But no, I mean, it's silly and ridiculous, and also can be dangerous at a certain point. But Jamarl, isn't it satisfying? Isn't that like reverse segregation, not reverse racism, but all the white people get in the back of the line?
It's weird.
It feels weird.
It's just weird.
But isn't that
nobody backed that? There was no person of color.
But did they do it?
No. God, no. Nobody did that mess.
White people didn't exit the line and get
Nobody moved. Nobody did anything. It was just like...
Isn't that racist, Jamarl?
That nobody moved when they said get in the back of the line. Yeah, it's just very weird. And some of the stuff, it just seems like it's... it just seems like it's bending over backwards, and it's doing this theatrical stuff without the real world phenomena of, okay, what are the things that would really benefit?
Well, yeah, it doesn't make things fundamentally better.
Right.
But it's an identity ploy. You feel differently about things. You're making yourself feel certain, I don't know how else to say it. You're making yourself feel certain ways about things. Some people are making themselves feel better than other people. Other people are being made to feel like they're worse than other people. And there might be a grain of truth in it, but mostly it's posturing and trying to get people, and an expression of power, trying to get people to act in certain ways. And yet at the same time, there is also deep, insoluble, apparently insoluble at least, racism in our society that runs in undercurrents and in pretty clear ways through who possesses what, level of money, power, whatever, in all these different sectors. So obviously racism is real, but how do you deal with that? Is it, again, to try to get people to, I guess, morally high ground and command other people, which is what's going on in your case, or in the case of Lori Lightfoot, just selectively only deal with certain groups of people? It's what's interesting to me about the Lightfoot thing is that it's it has in its own ways, of course, things in common with like disproportionately hiring black or people of color in certain industries because you want to boost their representation. It's just another version of that. You know what I mean?
But this is far more extreme. I mean, because even in those cases of like you're talking about what is the name of it? What is the name of it? Affirmative action.
Exactly, affirmative action.
But white women were the ones that predominantly took benefit from affirmative action.
But ostensibly, at least up front, the idea was a lot of people from different unrepresented groups would suddenly become a lot more represented. But isn't this just another kind of affirmative action, Jamarl?
No, I mean it's one thing if affirmative action said you can't hire white people. She's basically saying, I'm not going to interview. Like, that's kind of my point, right? If she would have said, in order to draw attention to the fact that there aren't enough African-American journalists and reporters, especially on the beat in Washington, I'm going to give deference. That's one thing.
Well,
but to say, I'm just not going to do that.
In the coming race war, I would really like to have a Native American executioner because I feel like that would be the most on point.
Yeah, it would balance out. A lot of stuff that took place.
It would. It would. There was a kind of like weirdly delayed payback gratification thing. I'm not one of those people who genuinely. Anyway, we need to go to a break and come back with our guest. So we're going to do that. I'm going to get away from that last comment of mine, I guess. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break and coming back with Peter Oliver. Again, be back with Peter Oliver on the other side of the short break. Be right back.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, talking Nord Stream 2. This after Biden announced that he would be waiving some sanctions on the relevant German company, in this case, for this conversation. To join us to talk about Nord Stream 2 and more, we're joined by one of our usual correspondents on this, and the great EU correspondent in general, Peter Oliver, is the EU correspondent for RT International. He provides daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union, and you can follow him on Twitter at PeterGOliver_RT, and you can catch his reporting weekly on RT International. Peter, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, guys. How's yourselves?
Good, and better for having you on with us. Let's get into Nord Stream 2. We've had you on all the time to talk about this. Also, black and green politics and a black and green coalition, or a green-black coalition potentially in Germany. Both of these, interestingly enough, related to each other. A green CDU-CSU coalition in Germany could have severely affected, and it could still severely affect the future of Nord Stream 2. And yet, at least at this point, it seems like things are lightening up slightly for that pipeline. Now, this would be the second pipeline installed across the Baltic Sea, effectively transporting gas from Russia down into Germany underwater. And this second pipeline would dramatically expand. It would more than double the ability of to import gas by that means in that region, which would be significant for Germany and, of course, significantly improve in its own way relationships between Germany and Russia. Now, we in the U.S. have for a long time opposed that, but Biden has just made some moves making it easier for that to happen effectively by voting to waive these sanctions on a company in charge of Nord Stream 2. Peter, what's the company and how is this being received in Germany?
Well, this is the company behind Nord Stream 2. This is the operating company for the pipeline. Not sanctioning them basically allows the pipeline to be completed. There's currently 93 kilometers of the pipeline to be finished in Danish waters, which shouldn't take very long, and then 28 kilometers in German waters, 75 miles altogether, to translate that for you. It's now looks like it's going ahead. When we talked about a month ago, it looked pretty rough for this ever being completed. This is an interesting move that's being quite well received here in Germany from President Biden. Ultimately, by not doing this, even by not sanctioning the company itself, this pipeline will be completed. It isn't that there isn't U.S. sanctions against people involved in the pipeline production. For Russian ships have had sanctions put on them. It's the European side of this that has avoided sanctions for now. These have been suspended for 90 days, though. And that is where it starts to get a bit more interesting, because nothing's ever simple with this pipeline here. We heard very strong language coming out of Washington early this year. We do not want it. We will stop it. This is a bad deal for Europe. It's a bad deal for Germany. It's a bad deal for the security of Europe, and to allow Russian infrastructure, as it was being talked about, onto NATO territory. However, I think when you looked at what happened during the foreign ministers' meeting of the G7, that meeting that was held in London, and you heard the comments from Heiko Maas, the German foreign minister, who was stood alongside he wasn't stood alongside Antony Blinken. It was following a meeting with Antony Blinken in which he was asked about Nord Stream 2, and Heiko Maas said, yeah, we talked about it. Our position hasn't changed. Their position hasn't changed. Something's going to have to give, and it now does seem that something has given, and it's been the US side. But now what everybody's waiting for here is, what does Washington want in return for this? Because by doing this, it's basically giving it the green light. Norbert Röttgen, who's the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee here, called this a conscious political sign in favor of Germany, and said, this is Norbert Röttgen, who's from the CDU, that's Angela Merkel's party, the ruling party here in Germany, said Germany must now make suggestions how to meet the critics here and the European neighbours, and also the US in the matter. Basically, what some of the suggestion is here is that the US has taken its foot off the gas when it comes to pressuring for Nord Stream 2 to be stopped. What we are hearing is a lot more pressure coming from Eastern Europe, particularly from Poland, from the Baltic states, and of course outside of the EU and outside of NATO, from Ukraine, saying that this needs to be stopped. So what the US has done is what Joe Biden's done by this, is saying that, look, we've given it the green light to Germany. Everybody's looking at you now. What are you going to do about it? It's Angela Merkel. I was asked exactly the question: what is Germany going to give in response? Just this week, she gave a very evasive answer, really. She didn't give anything away. She said, that is not measured in millimeters and grams for now. So, essentially, this is the US having one in the you owe us one column when it comes to Germany. In terms of the German public, this is a pretty popular move, because what has surprised a lot of people who were writing articles saying that this was completely dead in the water a month ago, 2 months ago, is that 75% of the German public that was surveyed this week say they want the pipeline finished and they want the pipeline open, and only 17 went against it. What is perhaps even more surprising about German public opinion when it comes to this is when you look at those Green Party voters, or people who said that they would be voting for the Green Party, 69% of them said this needs doing. And the reason for that is simple. Germany needs this energy. It's not just Germany that needs this energy.
Right there.
It's
That's
not
what I was going to go with.
This isn't only
because regardless of
issue either.
regardless of the attacks on Russia and everything else, I've been to Germany. It is cold and energy is expensive. And so it's like, Czech Republic, Germany, like many of those countries, the energy is very expensive. It's hard to, the U.S., our energy production here is not expensive in context. So it's sometimes hard to kind of get your head around it. But yeah, I can totally imagine that German public, on issues of sovereignty and on issues of cutting down the amount of money that they pay for energy, and for that matter, getting that additional energy production, are totally on board for this. There were even talk about sanctions against the U.S.? Is that something that was being discussed at some point in Germany?
Well, you've got to remember there are sanctions against the US. The US and the EU have trade sanctions against one another at the moment. These are all legacies from Donald Trump's era of diplomacy. There are big tariffs. What are tariffs if they're not sanctions on goods, particularly when you wield them as a weapon? But yes, I mean, when we've talked in the past, we talked about a balancing act, like putting weights on the scales of how you're going before this tips one way or the other. And it now does seem that Joe Biden has taken the US's weights off that scale and said, go ahead, do it if you want. But it's worth noticing, this isn't permanent. This is 90 days. It's 90 days. And let's see what the United States wants from Germany, or wants Germany to stand alongside it on. Because the diplomatic chatter here in Berlin is particularly that there's something coming down the track that the US wants Germany and wants the EU standing alongside it, because it's to do the European Union a great disservice economically. Let's think about it in American sport terms. This is a bit like the 90s Chicago Bulls. Yes, they won everything. Yes, they were doing all right. But without Michael Jordan, it's not really that team, is it? And, it's a similar thing when it comes to economics in Europe is, yes, there are big economies in the European Union, but without Germany on side, you're not really having that championship winning performance.
Well, is something coming down the pike, or they just don't want to outright lose? Because most of the pipeline is done. And like you said, the German Republic basically agrees with it and backs it. It's a sovereign home project. It's needed. The gas is needed. And so is it one of those situations where Biden pulls his foot off the gas, not because, there's something that we want out of this or something coming down the pipe, but more so because they didn't believe that they could win it and they were just going to outright lose it. And losing looks worse.
That's also completely feasible, is that this was getting to a point whereby the United States was starting to look, its options were to basically tell Germany, you're not having your pipeline. And we will, because, what we were hearing at the beginning of the year was, we will do everything we can to stop it. There was, of course, an attempt by Germany to try and buy their way out of this. They offered a billion euro, I think it was $1.2 billion to the United States to buy liquefied natural gas from them. That didn't go down well here, and it certainly didn't go down well in the United States, because it looked like they were being, that they were taking a bung. It looked like, from the German side, it looked like they were offering a bribe in order to get this over the line. In the US side, it looked like they were dealing in that quid pro quo type of situation when it came to diplomatic matters. Pulling out of this is the sensible option, because you don't lose. And, Germany can go ahead, and then it's on Germany to deal with this, because, as you talked about in the lead into me, we do have this big election coming up this year. When I say it's a big election, it's because we are set for definite change one way or the other. Angela Merkel steps down. There's going to be a new chancellor, and who that is, they're going to have a heavy green influence, it would seem, in their government. The latest polls do suggest that following the improvements in the vaccine system here in Germany, and after a few more people have actually heard what Annalena Baerbock has had to say, the CDU, CSU have gone up in popularity, and the Greens have tailed down just a little bit. It's still very fine margins that we're dealing with. If I was to put any money on this right now, I'd be suggesting it would be Armin Laschet, a CDU chancellor, with a Green Party very heavily present in the government. Now, this is why the US could still get what they want, because depending on how heavily present that Green Party is in the government is more of a say of how they can try and stop this pipeline, because they do not want this pipeline whatsoever. Their foreign policy spokesperson, Omid Norikur, was speaking just this week. He said that the Nord Stream 2 should be stopped. He's described it as a fossil splitter in Europe and a bet against climate protection. They don't like this pipeline. As far as they're concerned, unfortunately, they don't have a better answer of how Germany gets that energy which it needs, because it's not just consumer prices that are high. My energy prices are huge here compared to what my friends and family pay in the UK, compared to what I used to pay when I was living in Moscow. It's absolutely rampant.
Well, and on that, Peter, I want to we want to close to go into a break, and we're going to come back and pivot to German politics. But we've been focusing on Nord Stream 2, and so I want to get into exactly what you just brought up, which is the price of energy here. If you know the industrial stats, be happy to get into those. But I'm most interested in consumers, because those are the voters. Residences basically. How much would energy prices drop, assuming this Nord Stream 2 pipeline gets introduced in Germany? I'm guessing that's in the conversation somewhere. Any statistics you're aware of on that, Peter?
It is hard to put a figure on how much it would drop. What you're more likely to see is it stay at the levels that it is at, because we've been seeing quite high rates of rise. I mean, I think I pay around just based on my apartment here, I pay around €75 a month in electricity bills, and that's pretty reasonable, because I managed to get it pegged a few years ago that it would frozen, that it wouldn't go up anymore for me for a couple of years. But I think if I was to put in the same bill right now, it would have gone up to maybe around 100, perhaps even a little higher than that per month for for electricity. And I'm not living in a big place, pretty small apartment. So what they'll be looking at is that Nord Stream 2 provides that gas that allows things to level out a little bit, because that sector has been increasing far too rapidly, because it shouldn't be an issue in a modern, democratic, forward-thinking, forward-looking society like Germany, that people go, why my heating bill's quite a lot of money.
Well, that is particularly true. I mean, energy, I was just having a conversation about this the other day, and we got to go into a break, but energy is interesting because here in the U.S., with the pipeline shutdown as a result of that hack, we saw gas prices specifically going up significantly. Now, gas isn't oil. What I'm talking about there is for vehicles predominantly, not for heating your home. But what was interesting to me was to think about, okay, so gas prices are the highest they've been since 2014. But this is despite inflation. A lot of the prices that we're sort of mentally pegged to around energy, at least here in the United States, seem to be offsetting inflation quite a bit. If we used to have higher prices than we have had for a while, then that's despite the fact that the cost we're paying for the good is actually decreasing over time, sort of silently and visibly, as inflation continues to happen, as the value of the money you're spending on it goes down and down. Anyway, we need to go into a break. We'll be back in a minute with Peter Oliver following up, talking more German politics, a black-green coalition, what that might look like, and the gaping sound as Angela Merkel leaves office as chancellor in Germany. Who would be replacing her, what her absence will look like, how fondly she may be remembered by some sectors of the German public. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're joined by Peter Oliver, EU correspondent for RT International, and we will be back with Peter on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And as Shane alluded to as he was closing the break, Angela Merkel is on her way out. The Christian Democrats, that party, is going to have to basically go without her. She's been in office for 16 years, and that dynasty is coming to an end. What comes next? What was the Merkel doctrine in regarding domestic politics? And what most likely is going to come on the other side of what is basically a political icon? To join us or to have a conversation about it, we're joined with Peter Oliver. Peter Oliver is an EU correspondent for RT International, providing daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. Peter, thank you for continuing to join us.
Always my pleasure.
Absolutely. So what is, they used to call it the Obama doctrine or the Bush doctrine, and this usually involves foreign policy, but let's say for the moment that this was talking about domestic policy. What would the Merkel doctrine be regarding domestic policy? I mean, what is the Merkel economy or the Merkel political system? And within the context of that, how does that change when Merkel leaves?
I think well, there's two ways of looking at it. There's the way that Angela Merkel would like to be remembered. I mean, she was asked this question just yesterday in a press conference, and she said, how would you like history to remember you? And she said, I would like to be remembered as not having been lazy. I think that's a little bit of the understatement that she has been quite famed for during her time in office. She was once asked a few elections ago, I think it was my first German election, so it was probably the 2 election cycles back, what she had to say to the public, and she gave a recipe for potato soup. But the idea behind what Angela Merkel's 16 years has essentially been stability and growth. Now, that has tailed off a little bit at the end, particularly when it comes to growth because of the pandemic, even though Germany still sustained pretty well. But also stability within the party. The cracks have really shown at the end there. There's a big corruption scandal that's still threatening to overturn the CDU-CSU vote, where a number of MPs have already stood down and won't be standing in the next election because they were found to have taken money to lobby on behalf of either mask companies or PPE companies, or on behalf of foreign governments, in the case of Azerbaijan and a couple of them. But still lots going on with that. In terms of foreign policy, Angela Merkel was able to provide that bridge between East and West, which is an awful stereotype that's often said about Germany and often by people that don't particularly understand what they're talking about when it comes to Germany. But there you go, I've just said it anyway. But she has been able over those years to speak as frequently, often and openly with Vladimir Putin in Moscow as she has been able to speak with President Bush, Obama, and Biden. During the Trump years, things weren't great, as I think we all know. I mean, it was pretty rough. But when it comes to the two of them did not get on, and that was pretty much there for all to see. When it comes to what happens next, the very latest polls, if Germans went to the polls today, there would be another female chancellor, and it would be Annalena Baerbock of the Green Party. The very latest polls put the Greens on 25%, with the Union, that's the Christian Democratic Union, and the Christian Social Union on 24%. They've clawed back that gap, though. There was a bigger gap between the Greens and the CDU and CSU just in the last few weeks. I would say, I think I said in the last section as well, if I was to put my money on it right now, it would be that it will be a black-green coalition with a CDU chancellor, and that will be Armin Laschet. Now, Armin Laschet is, he's the continuity candidate.
Well, real quick, the Greens themselves, their capability, I mean, was this entirely because of the corruption scandals that was taking place, or is this a policy-driven, or both? I mean, like, why have the Greens all of a sudden become in vogue? And I know Germany has elected Greens in general, but this is something different. Why?
For a change, ultimately, and that is as simple as it could be put. I mean, there are a lot more economic, environmental, and every other type of reasons for it. But the number one reason when people are asked on the street in Germany, why would you vote Green? Would you vote Green? Yes. Why would you vote Green? Is they haven't been in power for the last 16 years, because those people that want anything changing, if you're in the CDU, the CSU, you're the person that's really shaped the country how it is over the last 16 years. Also, if you're in the Social Democrats, you've enabled those policies because you've been part of that government coalition. And the Greens have been on the outside of that. They have a more comprehensive what's it called, a more comprehensive agenda than just environmental policies. In the state of Baden-Württemberg, they're in charge of the state government down there. It's one of the wealthiest areas of Germany. Their critics would say that the Green Party are essentially, in some cases, just the conservatives who are really into recycling. Because there's not a lot of different. Because it is very interesting to note that your Green Party in the southwest of Germany, the very wealthy southwest, Baden-Württemberg, around Stuttgart, those type of areas, your Green Party voter there is quite different to your Green Party voter up here in Berlin, where there's a lot more dreadlocks and your classic campaigning Green political activist here. So they have become quite mainstream. They haven't been tainted by being in government. And people ultimately are saying, do you know what, why not? Let's give them a chance at some point.
Very interesting.
Whether that will still be 25% of the electorate saying that come September, I don't think so.
Yeah, because it gets real.
One thing Germans love a bit of stability. And that is
the closer it gets to the election, the more real it gets. And the more real it gets, those people have to make a real decision, not just kind of, I want these guys out of government. Social Democrats don't seem to have fared too well in all of this. I mean, in one part, they were the junior partner. The junior partner basically was not, was losing in the polling on this stuff. And so they didn't receive, they took, I would probably say, one of the worst aspects of this. And I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. On top of this, and on top of this, immigration. Angela Merkel, I remember distinctly where you had all of the people, the refugees coming from Syria during the war. And Angela Merkel was one of the political forces in Germany that basically allowed them in. And this is in spite opposition either from the population itself or the political class. What happens when she leaves on this front?
Well, I mean, those people are here now. Ultimately, that was it was painful at the time for some people. It was painful for some people that don't think there should be more brown faces in Germany. That it comes down in many ways to as simple as that. There were others that had more reasoned reasons for not wanting a million people to move into the country. But ultimately, if you took this on a data-driven reason and took all emotion of refugees and people and, let's face it, racism out of it, Germany needed those people in order to be able to keep on with economic growth. There is essentially a declining population in Germany. They needed that migration. Now, what you have seen is a lot of success stories when it comes to refugees from Syria and migrants from elsewhere that have come in and have integrated into Germany. But it was a painful thing, and it will be one of those legacies of Angela Merkel. Her phrase "Wir schaffen das," we can do this, was thrown back at her an awful lot. It was a painful transition. It ultimately,
now, when you said painful transition, what do you mean? Because you've said painful a few times. What was the pain in it? Is it just the bringing in the refugees to the country, the setting up the refugee camps, the crime, or some of the other problems that were at the refugee camps? Like, what was the pain aspect of this?
I think the pain aspect for a certain demographic of the German population was that they thought that their Germany was being taken away from them. That's why we saw a significant rise and one of the reasons why there is still a significant issue when it comes to far-right extremism in Germany. The major, sadly, terror incidents that we've seen in Germany in recent times have sadly all been from the far right, directed towards migrant communities. And unfortunately, this does seem to have been one of the things that's come from that transition of bringing in 1 million people into a country. If you do that Germany's a big country, but if you do that in anywhere, there's going to be issues of, particularly when people come from, in many cases, quite different cultures to Germany. So there has been issues there. I don't think that will have any impact upon this election. It certainly did at the last election, which is why we saw the Alternative for Germany party, the far right
AfD,
anti-immigration opposition, come into the Bundestag, and essentially they've spent the last parliamentary term being the main opposition.
Peter,
here.
we're going to have
However,
to end it here, but I really do appreciate you coming on the show. Peter Oliver is the EU correspondent
anytime
for RT International, providing daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. You can follow him on Twitter at Peter G. Oliver _RT, and you can catch us reporting weekly on RT International. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And that will strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, more than 29,701 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 654 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 28,933 cases per day, a decrease of 36% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 38% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 48% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,076,464 people across the United States and has killed 588,153 human beings. The UK has pledged its support for a new surveillance network called the Global Pandemic Radar to track coronavirus cases and new strains, directed in part by the World Health Organization. This comes about a week and a half after the largest independent review. Argentina is starting a strict lockdown this Saturday following 39,000 new cases on Wednesday. Joe Biden signed into law the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which received overwhelming support from both chambers of Congress. The bill will make it easier to report hate crimes at all levels. Federal investigators say they're expanding their investigation into New York Attorney General Andrew Cuomo from his administration's cover-up of COVID deaths to his acquiring early COVID tests for use of his family. This news comes out at the same time as it's been reported that Cuomo acquired early COVID testing for his family in the days following a media outcry over reports that he was receiving early COVID testing for his family. A ceasefire was declared yesterday between Israel and Hamas following almost 2 weeks of armed conflict in the region. The ceasefire was declared with no preconditions and has been holding for over 12 hours. Well, now, Palestinians have been sharing a hashtag claiming victory. The question now is whether or not the ceasefire will hold. There are reports right now, as we speak, about Israeli police attacking Palestinians at the Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. After all, as we made the point about the celebration and the hashtag claim of victory, people went to the mosque, and you have another conflict taking place at the mosque. We also have a clip of Biden coming out about this. Let's play the clip, Andre.
Folks, I've just spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Earlier today, I spoke with President al-Sisi of Egypt. Prime Minister Netanyahu informed me that Israel has agreed to a mutual unconditional ceasefire to begin in less than 2 hours. The Egyptians have now informed us that Hamas and the other groups in Gaza have also agreed. In my conversation with President Netanyahu, I commended him for the decision to bring the current hostilities to a close within less than 11 days. I also emphasize what I've said throughout this conflict. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against indiscriminate rocket attacks from Hamas and other Gaza-based terrorist groups that have taken the lives of innocent civilians in Israel. The Prime Minister also shared with me his appreciation for the Iron Dome system, which our nations developed together and which has saved lives of countless Israeli citizens, both Arab and Jew. I assured him of my full support to replenish Israel's Iron Dome system to ensure its defenses and security in the future. Over the last 11 days, I've spoken with the Prime Minister 6 times. I've also spoken with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority more than once, and part of our intense diplomatic engagement. And I want to also thank the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, our National Security Advisor, and everyone on our team for their incredible efforts to bring this about, this outcome that we're about to see. You know, we've held intensive high-level discussions, hour by hour, literally. Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, and other Middle Eastern countries, with the aim of avoiding the sort of prolonged conflict we've seen in previous years when the hostilities have broken out. I extend my sincere gratitude to President al-Sisi and the senior Egyptian officials who played such a critical role in this diplomacy. I also appreciate the contributions of other parties in the region who have been engaged in working toward the end of hostilities. These hostilities have resulted in the tragic deaths of so many civilians, including children. And I send my sincere condolences to all the families, Israeli and Palestinian, who have lost loved ones, and my hope for a full recovery for the wounded. The United States committed to working with the United Nations, and we remain committed to working with the United Nations and other international stakeholders to provide rapid humanitarian assistance and to marshal international support for the people of Gaza and the Gaza reconstruction efforts. We will do this in full partnership with the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, the Authority, in a manner that does not permit Hamas to simply restock its military arsenal. I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely and to enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. My administration will continue our quiet, relentless diplomacy toward that end. I believe we have a genuine opportunity to make progress, and I'm committed to working for it. I want to thank you all. May God bless you all and pray that this continues. Thank you so much.
Pray this apartheid continues. Great. Japan is considering freezing all aid to Myanmar over the coup government's violent response to protesters. Tokyo has long had ties to the Burmese military, although Myanmar has several days ago fired 2 diplomats in its embassy in Tokyo for rejecting the coup government's claims. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I want to go back to Joe Biden for a moment. That speech, Joe Biden says he invokes Abbas, Mahmoud Abbas. Nobody else has. He does that. And, you know, on some level, I suspect that people are calling this a win for Hamas because Hamas comes across as this was the person who was fighting Israel. Israel stops under, no preconceptions. These guys looked like they were standing and unifying the Palestine, all that stuff. Fair enough. Abbas has nothing to do with this in a weird way, like undermined and subverted on some level from a political space. Biden invokes him and is basically saying, we're not going to work with Hamas, we're going to work with them. It's an interesting speech. I mean, the weird part is, I think there's a few weird parts. And maybe on some level, this gets to the whole shifting sand argument we were having yesterday, or conversation. This idea that when Obama was in office, there were over 2,000 Palestinians that were killed. And the public and the government of this country basically accepted that number continuously going up higher and higher and higher. Whereas this time around, the number is at, 230, 240? And basically, there was all sorts of pressure that was brought to bear on Biden, so much so that he felt that he needed to come out and be like, I'm telling Netanyahu to stop. Well, that's after you've given him all of these weapons, like $700 million in weapons aid. And that's after protecting him in the Security Council. But the point is that the politics of it on some level made Biden believe that he needed to do it. whether he was doing it or not. Meaning, I don't believe for a moment that he had a conversation with Netanyahu, cut it out, cut it out. I don't believe that happened. I do believe that when he was having this conversation with the media and with the press, he's aware and he recognizes that he's getting pressure for taking a position where Israel gets a blank pass. And as such, he goes through political maneuvers or political maneuvering of, yes, I push Netanyahu to get this done. I am pushing Israel. I am working with this quiet litigation behind the scenes. It's that. If you didn't feel like you need to do that, you wouldn't do that. And I suspect a lot of that came from a lot of pressure that he's getting in Congress. And I think that's new. Like when we've had guests here before, and those guests have been following this issue for a very long time, and those guests are like, I think this is new. And it's like, I don't know, man. I mean, this still seems, I mean, you're talking about like 10 people, 12 people, maybe 20 people. But that's a lot more, hell of a lot more than apparently was there prior. And the language about apartheid state and stuff like that, Human Rights Watch at this point calls Israel an apartheid state. That seems to be typical language now that doesn't necessarily seem to be considered out of hand, even in mainstream media. It's very interesting in regards to, it does seem like something is shifting, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything shifting from the standpoint of apartheid, if that makes sense. Like, yes, this ends. And whether there's a media win or everything else, in bare bones, physical matter reality terms, that's still an apartheid state. That land is still getting expropriated. They still have no control over that space. So whatever the political wins that are taking place domestically among the various groups in Palestine and everything else, there's still a reality to this, that this is basically what it was before. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, like, Biden is very clearly, I'm on the side of Israel. By the same token, Biden seemed to be less hawkish on this front than I've seen him in the past. And is that pressure? What are your thoughts?
I genuinely actually don't know what to make of it. But it seems like the tide has shifted slightly on culturally on the issue of Israel and Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And so to that extent, you know, Hamas is right not to be celebrating it necessarily, but certainly to be saying that and to be making a point of that. But at the same time, you know, Biden didn't. It's not equivocation. He just tried to add in enough ambiguity in his response and to do what you would expect him to do, which is to not really say all that much about how to resolve the conflict, but just to effectively wish the best to everyone and be glad that the conflict is over, which is about all that you can. It's not even safe to say that necessarily, but it's about all that you can safely say. You know, by not taking one side, of course, you risk the ire of the other because they're going to be pissed at you if you don't support them. But by default, he's doing what's going to work, which is to sort of stay out of it, and they appear to be resolving it at least temporarily. But he wouldn't use. Imagine if a president were to use the word apartheid. To refer to the situation going on in Israel.
That would be huge.
That would be huge.
Because if they're using that word, there's other stuff that's going along with that word. Meaning they're not, like, I don't believe somebody would say apartheid and then block a Security Council resolution that calls for a ceasefire. I don't think those two things work together. Or I don't think it's, hey, I'm going to give you guys nearly $1 billion in weapons, but I'm calling it an apartheid state.
China's committing a genocide and we support it.
Right.
The
and
American
notice how
government
weird, like we were like, that makes no sense.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Yeah. Well, same thing here.
In its weird way, it totally would be. I think it would take one thing that would significantly change, obviously, the relationship with Israel is if you had even a single president who came in and if you had somebody who was much more modified on that country.
Yes.
Somebody who was like, okay, let's significantly reduce the amount of money that we're giving them, if not cut it off entirely.
Yeah.
You know, those kinds of things. But just in general, Trump was heading in that direction. What makes that conversation a lot easier is if you see a reduction of investment and aid overseas in general from the United States, which Trump was doing. In other words, if Israel becomes one of a few standout countries that we're giving money to and giving support to, and it's notable in that way, then that would make it easier to scrutinize it in general and kind of pull back the amount of that we're doing. And Trump was headed, again, in that general direction, although he was as close to friendly as you could be with Israel.
Do you think
more so than Biden
also is a thing that's messing with Biden and Democrats on the issue of Israel?
And driving some of the pushback here, you mean, right?
Yeah. I mean, because Netanyahu and Trump were so close. I mean, Trump bent over backwards. I mean, moving Jerusalem, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's like, is that where some of the pushback comes from you can call it the woke left or some members in the Democratic Party that was under normal circumstances, 1-to-1 in the Israel thing. So look, there's all sorts of questions to be asked around this particular issue, especially around this notion of now what, and now what. And this is an article that just came out. Israeli police attack Palestinians at Jerusalem Al-Aqsa Mosque. Yeah. So it's unfortunate.
So the ceasefire has been broken, you're saying, but that's just.
Well, I don't know if it's been broken. This is like a protest.
That's just okay. Yeah, protest.
Yeah, it's just protest. Yeah, it's a bit. Yeah, you know. So, but look, let's end it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, talking crypto with a new guest, Joseph Leibowitz, foreign relations lobbyist and crypto day trader. This comes after the recent plunge in the values of Bitcoin, of Dogecoin. I think I saw Ethereum dropping too. Anyway, just across the board, cryptocurrencies dropping. And we wanted to speak to somebody who's a little bit more positive. Often we will have guests who are critical, if not of cryptocurrencies in general, at least of the idea that they're cryptocurrencies as opposed to just, investment vehicles, kind of recent, slightly more high-tech investment vehicles. Anyway, to get into this conversation, let's get into it. We're joined by Joseph Leibowitz, foreign relations lobbyist, crypto day trader. Joseph, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Hey, how you guys doing? It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing great.
Great to have you. Let's get into it. I'll just start us off like this. Are you a crypto investor? And if you are, the last couple of days, crypto day trader, I would have to assume you are. The last couple of days,
it's like, no, I am not.
Exactly. The last couple of days, as these prices have plunged, how do you make of it? How does the community of investors make sense of it? And what's the sort of set of responses to it? Do you stay in? Do you get out? What's the reasoning behind why you'd make either of those decisions, Joseph?
Totally. So, yes, I am definitely invested in cryptocurrencies. I have holdings in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Dogecoin. I kind of stray away from the altcoins a little bit. They're very volatile. They have the ability to rise and fall very quickly, and I just don't see that as a good investment strategy. But when you're talking about the big coins, or what I like to call the big three, in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Dogecoin, I understand that the recent fall, the recent flash crash, as you like to call it, it could have seemed scary. It could have seemed something that you don't want to be involved in, especially if you got in at a higher price. I know that there was a lot of talk about the institutional floor of Bitcoin being 47,000, 48,000. That's when a lot of large investment groups got in. So seeing it break that floor definitely was a little frightening. But you have to understand, you need to look big picture here. I know short term this can look very scary, but long term, this is not the first time this has happened with cryptocurrency.
It happens. It's happened. If you look at the chart, and clearly a lot of the cryptocurrencies, I'll focus on Bitcoin just because it's the main one, but if you look at the chart, you will see this long, slow build-up period where the position on the chart is much lower, as the value of the coin is much lower. And then usually over the past year and a half, couple of years, whatever, you see these massive mountains. Now, what that is itself hiding is that even if I go to where that chart is a bit flatter, the amount of change of the value of an individual Bitcoin is still tremendous over that period of time. And so I understand why investors, if you're looking at this at some, as a day trader or as somebody who's looking to hold it for a period of a year or less, or even a couple of years, running that spectrum, there's just so much you can get, 100x gains out of it over the time scale of just a couple of years.
And what you need to look at is learning how to trade cryptocurrencies is as important as understanding how they really work. And many people try to long hold them, to trade them like stocks in a way where they will hold them and they'll say, okay, let me see how this does year over year. Now that's a very effective strategy, but it depends on how much you have in capital and principal to put down to begin with. If you're a lower level day trader or just someone trying to get their feet wet in crypto, the best way to really trade it, and why I'm so optimistic about it, is you can swing trade it. Just look at the recent swings. As it was this flash crash we were talking about that happened Tuesday morning, it fell. Every single cryptocurrency fell 25% across the board. Now, at first glance, this is crazy. The crypto market's not going to recover from this, but it's not the stock market. It will recover from this, and very quickly. So I can just tell you what I do.
Wait, did you say it's not the stock market?
It is not the stock market. It has nothing to do with stocks.
Agreed on that. But when you say, it sounds like there could be at least one suggestion or implication or assumption there, or two. But the one that sticks out is that the stock market, unlike the crypto market, will crash at some point soon. Did I hear that, or was I wrong in hearing that?
I don't want to impose undue speculation on if the stock market is going to come down or not, but market fundamentals would kind of tell us that we're getting toppy.
Do you think that crypto violates that in some way that the market doesn't?
I think it does. I think this overwhelming urge by the public to make flash cash, to make fast money, I think that it highlights a real problem within our economy. Is maybe we should look at why are so many people who work, middle class people, lower middle class people across the spectrum, why are they trying so hard to day trade cryptocurrencies? Maybe we should look at wages and jobs in our country and to see why people are forced into day trading to make ends meet. I think that has something to say about the overall health of the economy.
Well, but goodness, if they're moving into day trading to make ends meet, that would truly be a rundown, decrepit economy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I can't help but think that there are at least two factors. One would be the massive stimulus payments handed out over the last year and the propensity that gives some people to reinvest that. And then two, a lot of people did actually make quite a bit of money in the market. Say you'd been a private, not even a private, just a regular investor, like investing for retirement. Last March, if you were investing in the stock market, you saw the value of the assets you own drop significantly, but then you saw them go back up like crazy. And the stock market has gone gangbusters over the past 14 months approximately. And so people who put money in would see, something like 30% increases. I know people, and I've read about plenty of people, I'm not one of them myself, who would take some of the gains they've made in the stock market and then reinvest that in stuff like crypto. And so if people were doing it hand to mouth, I would see that as absolutely ludicrous. And you and I both have plenty of criticisms, I'm sure, that we have in common of the current composition of the stock market. But crypto is I'll put it like this. I saw some people who've been long-term investors and who've at the right points given the advice, hey, you should buy crypto now. And I didn't take them up on it. They posted it on social media, but they were right. They were talking about it at the bottom. And if you'd gone in on it, you would have seen over 10x gains in just a couple of months, honestly, which is kind of crazy. Nevertheless, they're saying right now, who knows? And I'm gonna hand it back to you. It could keep going up. It could crash. Any number of these things could happen. They seem to me, to be honest, they're looking at it. They don't know how it's going to go. Where do you think you might differ from them, Joseph?
So I kind of fit in the field of, if you look at the rate of inflation that our government is kind of trying to hide, if you look at the path fiat is on in its instability, there's a reason that the Federal Reserve has begun researching a U.S. dollar coin, a U.S. cryptocurrency like China recently released, because fiat won't be able to keep up in the future. And I think that's where crypto is going to fit in. I like to look at some of the bigger names in the stocks and see how they've made their waves into crypto. And you look at Cathie Woods.
Yeah.
When the stock market the crypto market, fell on Tuesday, Cathie had a feast. She's an absolute stunner on the stock market. Her ETFs have performed higher than any new ETF coming into the market ever has. And she bought, I think, upwards of $10 million of Ethereum on Tuesday alone, and she's stacking them on.
Wait, who were you talking about there? What was her name?
So Cathie Woods.
Cathie Woods. Okay, thank you.
Yes, she runs the ARC investment firm.
With a very well-known new high-tech investment, yeah, like you're saying, ETF. I know what you're talking about there. Jamarl, you were coming in there.
I was just going to make the point. You're making this conversation about cash. I mean, it feels like just what it looks like is this is pump and dump. The people drop money into it, then they pull money out, and then they put money into it again as it ticks away out, and they pull money out.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like it's this kind of a Ponzi scheme might be too strong, but as an investment vehicle, it seems something that just can't hold its value. It just seems to lose value. I mean, this is not the first sell-off I've seen for Bitcoin. It just seems like it fluctuates. From your standpoint?
It definitely fluctuates.
Right. So from your standpoint, why do you believe that it fluctuates like that? That it doesn't necessarily have some level of stick-to-it intrinsic, I guess you can call it value associated with it? Why the fluctuation, if indeed fiat currency is on the way up?
So there's two types of cryptocurrencies. There's stable coins, and then there's everything else. Now, the stable coin is the coin that is not going to move more than 0.1% every year. It is meant to stay at the value of that so that you can do transactions with it at that value and people understand what the price is going to be. The thing is, there's no centralized organization, there's no central government or body that governs Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a lot of the larger cryptos. So, for instance, you have a stock that's trading on the New York Stock Exchange, and it's a runner. People are throwing money in at pre-market. People are buying it as soon as the bell rings, and it shoots up 25% in an hour. But here's the thing. It can't actually go up 25% because when it hits that 20% mark, the stock market bosses will freeze the stock. They'll pause trading on it. They can manipulate the prices. I mean, look at the reason GameStop, AMC, but the meme stocks, when people were trying to invest in them heavily, look at the manipulation imposed by the hedge funds, the manipulation imposed by the trading platforms, the manipulation imposed by the stock exchanges. There were so many different levels of manipulation to stop the price from going up and down. With Bitcoin, you don't have that. There's no one to stop it. So if it starts running, it's going to run. And if it starts falling, well, there's no pausing of the trading to stop it from falling from a higher level. And that's where the real money-making opportunities come into crypto because this is what happens with it.
There's also the opportunity for people to lose money. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for people losing their shirts.
There's no easy way to put it, but don't invest what you can't afford to lose with crypto. It's not. But when has investing really ever been? If investing was as easy as putting money in and making money back, then why would anybody work? There's definitely a level of risk taken, and there's also a level of skill involved. If you know how to watch the market, if you understand the rise and falls of cryptos. For instance, when Ethereum oversold on Tuesday and it fell from 4,000 down to 1,900, I, like many other people, bought in when it went down to 19, and within 20 minutes it was back near 3,000. That level of drastic price increases is why it's so alluring.
20 minutes later, the value of the asset you just bought is gone up 50%, and particularly if you're not inclined to sell it at that moment, but instead to hold it, who knows what its value could reach stratospherically on the other side? A year down the line, or a month down the line, or even a week down the line. No, I get the point completely. But here, one sort of general response. What you were saying there was not that people shouldn't, clearly, people should invest in it, in your opinion, across the board if you have the money, because it has grown tremendously over the course of just a few short years. But what you were saying there was that unlike the real stock market, Bitcoin is not quote-unquote rigged. In other words, unlike the real stock market, as you can see with the AMC and GameStop, GME, those meme stocks that you were talking about, those were in some sense a sort of mass test of how the market actually works, and a PR move and a couple of other things, and a money-making opportunity, very obviously. But they were also revealing, lifting the veil off of the extent to which Wall Street is regulated by people who own it. And the thing with that, though, you're saying that Bitcoin is unlike that, but isn't so much of the value of Bitcoin driven by a few large players who have overwhelmingly purchased it or overwhelmingly mining it? In other words, isn't it on that high level even? Not regulated, by government fiat, but effectively regulated through these larger players that have bought into it so heavily. Joseph, what's your take?
So you're not wrong on the fact that it is, there is a risk of large players manipulating it. I mean, look at the Elon Musk fiasco that just happened this week.
Exactly.
He was able, he crashed the whole market, to put it bluntly, because I don't know if he actually understands the influence he has. I think he does and chooses to manipulate things on purpose.
I think he tests in it, but also revels in it. I think that I think he's testing it to see how much.
He's making
making
millions on us.
Yeah,
is what it is. Because look, Bitcoin is sitting at 58,000. Do you know how many people, especially large institutional investors, were sitting on their thumbs, not thinking that it was actually going to keep going? So many whales, as we like to call them, they missed their buy opportunity, especially with Ethereum. Ethereum, about a month ago, during the second actually meteoric Dogecoin rise, Ethereum went from 1,850 to 4,400 in a week, and many people missed that boat. They missed that boat completely. And so what you have is these waves of institutional investors. They put the Bitcoin on their transactional sheets, in their business. They own it, and then it increases in value, and they sell it. And now they're showing a profit. Now they're showing that the business is actually doing more successful. So what I worry about is companies using the volatility of cryptocurrencies to show that their companies are doing better, to then get more investors, to then make their own stock prices rise. And that is where the problem of manipulation that you were talking to comes in. You know, it's very concerning to me that people who have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on, say, Bitcoin can then crash the Bitcoin market. And the same people who crash the market are the same people that are buying it aggressively when it hits its bottom.
So I'm curious. I don't want to use you too much as a sort of arbiter or interpreter or something like that, but in the relationship between the community and those bigger institutional investors that you're talking about, whether they're whales or sharks, whatever they look like, mastodon sharks, I don't know, just massive creatures, coming in and buying this up and driving the price up and down and doing what they want to with it. What's the atmosphere? How do you feel about them? And how do you think the community feels about them? Joseph?
I think up until last Tuesday, we were pretty happy with Elon. I know as a holder of Dogecoin, it made me a lot of money when he was tweeting about it, when he was pumping it through the roof. I mean, just look at the average American. If you would have taken your $1,400 stimulus check when you got it a month and a half ago, or 2 months ago even, and you put it into Dogecoin when Dogecoin was down at like 5-6 cents, you could have bought 30,000 Dogecoins for $1,400. And then you could have waited not probably 2 weeks and then sold it for $25,000. So that got a lot of sentiment towards Elon and these people that were pushing things. But the same, we love you, thank you for rising our coins, sending them to the moon, as Elon would say, he got that same level of hatred when he then crashed the entire market. So I think that at the end of the day, this level of manipulation is not healthy for the crypto market because Joseph, it's not fair. Yeah.
What I'm hearing, and look, I get it. If you are successful at it, and I guess there's two questions here. Why not regular stocks? Like what's the thing that that makes crypto it for you, as opposed to, let's say, a vehicle like some kind of stock or something to that effect? But on top of that, if people would have jumped in with the 1,400. You're right. There would have been a certain percentage of people who would have made a ton of cash. Whatever that percentage is, what's the number or what's the percentage of people who lose their shirts in that process, though? Meaning for that coin to go that high, somebody is going to sell it, and that person is going to make a ton of bucks. What is the percentage of people who sell it and make a ton of money versus the people who sell it and lose their shirt? I'm just curious on the number, the comparison between those two things. Because it seems that the only way for somebody to make a ton of cash off of this is for somebody else to lose a ton of cash.
Well, doesn't the stock market work the same way?
Yes, it does.
In essence, someone needs to buy something in order to sell it. So, the problem with crypto, though, as it flash crashes, and you have platforms like, for instance, with Dogecoin, the majority of people hold their Dogecoin on Robinhood. Robinhood is a stock trading platform. They don't have the servers and the back of house engineers to deal with 1 million people trying to sell Dogecoin at the same time. And that's how that's where the real risk in losing all your money is the people that get caught up in the hype. People that bought Dogecoin at 70 cents on the night of SNL because they thought it was going to go to $1. It was going to jump. It was somehow that the market cap would double in the span of an hour and a half long SNL episode. I think where people lose money is it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how actually the economy, stock trading and crypto trading works. The market cap shows how much money is flowing into it. So when you're investing at Dogecoin at 60 cents a coin and the market cap is 95 billion, I see people on Twitter saying, "Oh, Dogecoin isn't just going to $1. Dogecoin is going to go to $10." It's like, could you do math? Because if you actually did math, you see that in order for Dogecoin to get to $10 with the amount of coins that are out there, you would need a market cap half the size of the United States economy. And I just don't think there's $15 trillion sitting around to go into Dogecoin. So that's where the real problem is you have these bot accounts, you have these institutional investors who are trying to pump it up so that they can sell theirs, and that is definitely where I see the biggest problem.
So that you know what? That actually, Joseph, that gives us a pretty simple initial lens that you can look at to determine the overall value of any one of these assets, and it's an extremely basic thing, but good for people to keep in mind, which is that if you look at the market capitalization, that is the total value of all of the assets available for purchase of that asset class, whatever. Talking about Dogecoin, it would be the value of all Dogecoin in the market right now. The market cap is literally a cap. It's a kind of ceiling. This is, again, 101, but for determining how much is in that class. So in other words, if you did the math and it worked out that for Doge to go up to $1 or $5 or whatever, the amount of money, the market cap would need to go something like 10x.
Exactly. It simply doesn't exist.
Exactly. That's so just for the audience, my point is that's a sort of initial tool that you can use for understanding this stuff a little bit more if you're wanting to pay attention to it. We've run over time in this segment, so I'm going to go to a break. Great conversation. I really appreciate you joining us like this. Joseph, thank you Joseph Leibowitz, thank you for the conversation.
Absolutely. Hey, guys, I really appreciated being here. This was a lot of fun. If you ever want to talk about cryptocurrency again or even foreign affairs or something to do with the economy, please feel free to reach back out. I'd love to come back on the show.
Absolutely,
awesome.
Man.
Sounds good. Thank you, man. All right, have a good one. Joseph Leibowitz, foreign relations lobbyist and crypto day trader. Man, we didn't even get into the foreign relations lobbyist. That's the other, at least as compelling and interesting side of the conversation we could have with Joseph. Anyway, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break and coming back on the other side. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. This is going to be an open segment. We're accepting your phone calls. The number is 804-28. Wait, no, I'm sorry,
202-521-1320.
521-1320.
Exactly right. And hopefully the echo there with both of us saying it helps to really get it into people's heads.
Right.
But I've come close to making that mistake. I've come so close to reading out my own phone number on the. I think I was talking about the.
Well, I wasn't going to go there. I was going to go with the 202 after the 804.
Oh, no, don't do that
Right.
one. No, that's too close. You're going to be actually throwing people off there. 202-521-1320.
That's it. 202-521-1320. Feel free to call in. You can have a conversation about what we were talking about previously in the show or anything else that is on the marquee for today.
Cryptocurrency. Israel, Gaza. There's at least a couple of big things.
Yep.
Princess Diana and the BBC.
That one is real big. And maybe we should get into that one a little bit more because we didn't get the opportunity. We have a clip for this one, and we're going to give Andre a chance to
pull it up. He's good. He's got it. I can see it.
Oh, excellent.
Thumbs up on that.
Excellent. Thumbs up on that one. So let's play the clip. Look, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. We had a situation where Martin Bashir, working for the BBC, basically lied and forged documents in order to make Princess Diana believe that she was being spied upon. In doing this creates a certain degree of paranoia that was detrimental and was the thing that was necessary for them to get that Panorama interview in the first place. A famous interview where she basically said, you know, there are three people in this marriage, talking about the other woman. So let's play the clip. I mean, because this is pretty big now. This was an investigation that took place where they found that the BBC was complicit in knowing Martin Bashir did. Let's play the clip.
I would like to thank Lord Dyson and his team for the report. It is welcome that the BBC accepts Lord Dyson's findings in full, which are extremely concerning. That BBC employees lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother, made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia, displayed woeful incompetence when investigating complaints and concerns about the programme, and were evasive in their reporting to the media and covered up what they knew from their internal investigation. It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse and has since hurt countless others. It brings indescribable sadness to know that the BBC's failures contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia, and isolation that I remember from those final years with her. But what saddens me most is that if the BBC had properly investigated the complaints and concerns first raised in 1995, my mother would have known that she had been deceived. She was failed not just by a rogue reporter, but by leaders at the BBC who looked the other way rather than asking the tough questions. It is my firm view that this Panorama programme holds no legitimacy and should never be aired again. It effectively established a false narrative which for over a quarter of a century has been commercialised by the BBC and others. This settled narrative now needs to be addressed by the BBC and anyone else who has written or intends to write about these events. In an era of fake news, public service broadcasting and a free press have never been more important. These failings, identified by investigative journalists, not only let my mother down and my family down, they let the public down too.
That's a really heartfelt, it's his mom, right? And so it's like when he's talking about this stuff, he's like, they created an issue of paranoia. They were lying to her about this. If she would have revealed this or if the BBC would have done an investigation, they would have, she would have known. I think his point is maybe she wouldn't have died.
Yeah.
I think that's his point. And so he might not come out directly and say it in those blunt terms. But if you're saying paranoia, if you're saying that they're spying on you, all this other stuff, and they ended up having a divorce immediately after. I mean, that wasn't the interview's fault. That was the fact that he was cheating on her fault. But you get my point. Like it's his family was directly impacted by the results of that.
Yeah.
And so, he's this measured, very slow, very heartfelt. He probably doesn't want to talk about this. It probably kills him to even talk about the fact that his mom, all of this stuff is probably difficult for him to do. But let's before we take the caller, what are your thoughts on this?
Well,
should they play the program again? Because their thought is you should never play that interview again.
No, that's not my attitude towards pretty much anything. No, you play it, but maybe add in some editorial commentary talking about that and
explaining it.
Yeah, in the same way that you, of course, add a retraction into a story, you can make that a part of the documentary and air it alongside it and have that for conversation. But no, that's sustain. But what's interesting to me about this, at least looking at it right now, is the fact that it's so popular in the United States, the fact that this is a big story over here for us to be talking about, because clearly Princess Diana was an international figure. It's not just a testament to how big it is in British politics, which is obviously massive and cleaves to the core of the media and the royalty, with the BBC, of course, being the British Broadcasting Corporation. It's their media outlet, and the royalty being the royalty.
Yeah.
It's pretty direct and pointed there, and also significantly revises, I think, the story of what happened with Princess Diana. But also, fundamentally, it shows the significance of the British royalty internationally to this day, which is just interesting. Between this and Harry and Markle on Oprah and everything that's been happening, it's all a constant reminder. Okay, these people are still fairly influential, even though in a weird way they're just a family.
Yeah, royalty, appointed by God in a weird way, because it's quasi. It's legal, but it's not. Like it's this very weird spot.
Yeah.
I guess it's legal because they're the queen and everything else, and that by definition is
I don't think
something different.
The conversation should be it should not be caught up on. I don't want to say where the conversation should be, but it shouldn't be caught up, in my opinion, either just talking about the gossip, and not that this is just gossip,
yeah,
or nor should it be stuck in just talking about how silly it is that we're still talking about the royalty, because each of those is, kind of a valid conversation to have in its own way.
Yeah.
And somewhere in between them, you might find something a little bit more interesting. And so therefore you probably shouldn't, somewhere in between or outside of that range. Anyway.
Well, I think the interesting conversation here is, should they benefit from something like that? Because if you...
The BBC you're talking about?
Because the BBC benefits every time they show that interview.
Yeah.
Even if you put in a blurb that says, okay, Martin Bashir did some horrible things to do this, and the BBC lied about it.
Is the BBC getting hurt by this now, do you think?
No.
Because it's 27 years later, Martin Bashir,
I don't even think he does, I haven't seen him in a very long time. So I don't think
it feels like it's so set in the past, and it's also put onto this figure that maybe they can, be a little bit more free from scrutiny. But are they going to face anything other than a talking down to and a reprimand from the royals?
I don't think so. I mean, the wag of the finger, especially after all of these years, I guess that's kind of my point. Isn't this incentivized on some level if you could use this later on? Meaning when all of the malfeasance, all of the hijinks, all of the stuff becomes known, broad daylight, make it as a day is new, and you have, in that situation, you are like, all right, we're able to benefit and prosper from doing this.
Yeah, it's screwed up. But I hear the point you're making.
If you're continuing to use it, does that create an incentive for you to do those things in the future? Because there were all sorts of things where the media would take their phone calls, listen in on answering services. Like, the British media is insane on some of this stuff. And so it's like, if that's your media space.
Well, and it's something else that's worth saying is it's just interesting to note how high stakes this clearly was for the BBC, where they had to rely on fabricating.
Yeah.
They
wanted that interview, but I don't think they knew going into it. I think they found out after the fact. Because in the article, they basically scrubbed some of the things that would have allowed people to see what Bashir did.
Yeah.
So BBC knew, but I don't think they knew in advance, if that makes sense.
No, but I just mean for him and how high stakes it would have to be.
Yeah.
To get that. It's just worth noting.
It's huge.
And clearly you don't know that she's going to die not too long after.
No.
And that adds this whole other layer to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's darker. I mean, if she never died. Oh yeah, let's go to callers.
Let's go to callers, because there's more to talk about on this, but more to talk about on plenty else too. We got Tarif calling from New Orleans on Israel. Tarif, you're on the line. What is on your mind?
Hey, how y'all doing? Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
I have two comments. First, for Jerusalem Silence. First comment is dealing with Israel and why. I was listening to Scott Ritter, and he made sense. He basically was saying that Israel declared a ceasefire. And the reason being is because maybe they was running out of Iron Dome missiles that was at $72,000 a pop, compared to Hamas rockets was at maybe $900.
That's interesting, because Joe Biden mentioned that we were going to replenish their Iron Dome system and stuff like that. It's possible. That's a good point.
Yeah. So you talking about anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 missiles that was launched by Israel. So that's anywhere from 288 million to 576 million. Okay, that was launched just to knock down 4,000 Hamas missiles. So if they went to war with Hezbollah, Israel would probably be in debt to the industrial complex. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
no, the best move for Hamas is to just try to find some way to make money from it, maybe, but just mass produce those and send those over as often as they can.
Yeah.
Because you're just going to hamstring Israel at that point.
They can't afford it. Yeah. I mean, how do they keep up with the Iron Dome if they run out of Iron Domes?
Yeah, unless they revolutionize the cheapness of that technology. Tarif, you weren't done.
Yeah, I'm not done. Okay, I'm still on my first point. And Hamas had started zeroing on the positions of the Iron Dome too. They start shelling it. That's probably another reason. Okay, my second comment is dealing with my case. I was thinking about Yusuf Erupt. I know he's not going to take my case, but I was thinking, I said, you know what? I guarantee you Turkey, Israel, Syria, Iran take care of their veterans. They make sure they get the best medical treatment. I guarantee you Hamas probably take care of the veterans. Now, and that's saying a lot, right? But anyway, so I'm saying, Mikey the Bakey contaminated water, you know what I'm saying? Trying to blow the whistle on them, trying to get the veterans taken care of. And it's amazing how in this civilized country, first world status country, that the veterans here, wasn't getting taken care of at Mikey the Bakey and other VA hospitals.
And Tarif, I feel the need now to step in and explain this for people. Tarif, are probably our most loyal caller, who calls in almost every morning, about 97% of the time, something like that. Tarif is also a whistleblower who worked in a Houston facility, Veterans Administration hospital, that had contaminated water running through the system effectively, and has been trying to blow the whistle on this. And it is always putting us, I'll be blunt with this and maybe open, and maybe this is a mistake, but it's an interesting position, Tarif, because you often bring up good information in your calls, and we like getting them. And at the same time, we've had you on to talk about this a couple of times now, but it's also, a fairly local and personal story. And so it's a little bit, we talk with you about it. From Yusuf Aram's perspective, this is a world away from where his mind is going to be. I can give you that as a guarantee. He's thinking Turkey. He's thinking Turkey and their foreign politics and stuff. And that's what he would talk about for sure. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I know. I just was saying it I have to remind the audience that I'm a whistleblower, every once in a while. And Mikey the Bacon water is contaminated.
I hear you.
Know what I'm saying?
And you're keeping that name out there. And I hear you. No, I hear what you're saying. All right. Tarif, thank you for the call. We got more, and we're taking more. 202-521-1320. We have Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line. What is on your mind?
Yeah, I just to pick up on what you're talking about Trump the other night, and a few other things. I basically think that at the end of the day, what's going on is a very political process. I don't support Trump. I hate his guts, but I hate Biden's guts too. And I just think it's very political. And basically, everyone knows that the Fourth Circuit in New York is a very political court. And that's where a lot of this stuff against Trump is being prosecuted, especially where they take political cases to persecute and oppress political people in the US. And also on Biden and Israel, basically Biden is basically succumbing to the pressure of the woke. The one thing the woke movement's done is I support Black Lives Matter. I support a lot of things the woke movement's done. But I just hope the Israeli-Palestinian conflict doesn't get hijacked by the woke neoliberals and the woke liberals and the Democrats, because it'll go nowhere. It'll be buried deep. And just on cryptocurrencies, the idea that these cryptocurrencies are somehow independent of any type of internal regulation, or they're sort of decentralized, is a load of bull. They're basically regulated by the nodes and the miners, and anyone who knows anything about it, the nodes and the miners basically control cryptocurrency. In terms of Bitcoin, there'll be 21 million in existence as of the end of this year. The most of them, the 99% of them, are already owned, and they'll be subdivided amongst us. Get used to your new central banking overlords. They own Bitcoin. And the idea that you're going to be allowed to have anonymous currency is a joke. The reason it crashed is because China has introduced their own cryptocurrency. Every government in the world around the world is regulating cryptocurrencies or abolishing their trade or criminalizing them and their trade in them. And basically this whole idea of, this liberation of currency from central banks is a joke, because no government anywhere in the world is going to let you trade in anonymous currency to bribe politicians, judges, police, you name it. They can bribe you with it. And I just think anyone who believes that cryptocurrency is the answer to the problem is an absolute joke. What really is the answer to the problem is revolution, a socialist and communist revolution.
Oh, man.
Thank you, Ann. I appreciate the call.
Michael from Sydney, I'm not sure I disagree with you at the end there. I've got my own ideas about how to fix things. But on cryptocurrency, I don't know. I hear you. As long as you're treating it like an investment vehicle, I think that's a safe call. When you get a little bit too ideological about it, I don't know that how well that's actually going to pan out when it confronts reality. But that sounds like a good passionate debate to have at some point.
The cryptocurrency versus not.
Well, yeah, but from the ideological angle.
You mean whether this ability to be away from dollars,
supplant the role of central banks and the structure of world governance, and replace, instead of having governments, where people would take it specifically with Ethereum and other services like that, is you replace a lot of governance with smart contracts and things like this, where it gets crypto anarchistic and anarcho-libertarian, and this is what Mark Frost rails against, and a little bit closer to what Tom Luongo, another former guest on the show, what he would have pushed for, although I don't know exactly what he thought about that setup. Anyway, there's an ideological take here for a while there.
I mean, libertarian take, basically.
Yeah, libertarian take that was like at the roots of cryptocurrency and pushing it as a genuine alternative to the whole system. And that was like a backdraft for the whole thing. And that led to the asset value of all these currencies going up all over the board across the class pretty much, except for a bunch of the altcoins. But if we're talking Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, what's had the wind at their backs is at least in part those ideas. And so getting into that conversation would be super interesting.
Yeah. I don't entirely buy the digital currency stuff. It's like anything can be currency, right? I mean, because none of it's real. By the same token, the full faith and credit of the United States matters. And until crypto has like that backstop, I think it's going to have problems with regards to maintaining this value.
No, not everything can be currency. I think simply, I don't know.
Well, I mean, tulips. Well, I know what you mean. You mean just in the sense of holding value. Like a tulip is not going to hold value.
No, that'd be a commodity. Yeah, that'd be closer to a commodity. No, and currencies are their own thing, but they also don't have. I wish that the dude hadn't died. David Graeber, the anthropologist,
he was really good.
Who I wanted to get to talk about his book Debt, the first 5,000 years, the title of his book on this. Currencies in his formulation, and it seems to be pretty well researched, thought out, presented. And at this point, at least, I haven't liked the disputations of it that I've seen. I haven't liked the people who've been criticizing it. A lot of the criticism has been kind of baseless from what I've read into it. And I took a while to sort of do scholarly back and forth in this book. Anyway, what he says is that money comes universally, effectively, out of credit systems that governments effectively turned into a sort of more or less fiat money system.
Right.
With metallic currencies, usually gold, of course, but also throwing in silver and other metals.
Just something that won't degrade over time.
Yeah, but it was a sort of formalization of credit systems, of a credit debt process that is itself fundamental to human nature, where even something like a gift society, it's not just this free-floating morass of, kumbaya, everybody gets something. Yeah. It is this sort of personal ledger of, okay, I've given you this, you've given me that.
Yeah.
It's these much deeper attachments that we have, these memories that we have of who did what for whom in this little local community that really defines what it means to be a human being. And then you formalize that into a credit and debt system where X gave Y two pounds of cocoa, et cetera. You get what I'm saying. And then if you add a centralizing authority in here, what you replace that whole informal social currency with is a literal physical currency, like a metallic currency, for instance, on the other side of the whole credit-keeping process. Anyway, having said all that, I grew up reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one of a number of series, and they talk about, having the leaves of trees as the new currency.
Yeah,
anything could theoretically.
It does.
So I grew up thinking that.
Real. Yeah.
But then why is it that if you look at the currencies that have arisen around the world, they've all been from a small number of substances, by and large?
They want to maintain the value. Like a tulip falls apart.
It's like independent origination.
Yeah.
Well, but here's my point: is if there's independent origination, if a bunch of different societies independently recreate the same materials for making money out of, and if there's like a quick and prevalent wildfire spread of using gold and of using metals for this kind of thing, it's inherently scarce. It's easy to split, easy to weigh, easy to purify and to test for purity. Mm-hmm. There are all sorts of benefits for it. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
For using metals as currency, which is why it happens. You know what I mean? But I get your point that all the value is inherently in some level subjective. We attribute the value to the currencies.
Right. We like, this is $1. It's like, okay, what is $1 worth? $1 worth what are we?
But $1 worth? In a weird way, this relates to gratitude. If people do us a favor, and that is the basis of what currencies actually come from, is these informal networks that we have, are those subjective? Yes. But does that mean that?
Favors?
But are they completely subjective? No.
What do you mean? The favors themselves? I mean, the fact that I did a favor for you is clear, but the value is
gratitude for them.
Dubious. I mean, like I give you a baseball card. I don't like baseball cards. I don't play baseball. I never played baseball. It may have zero value to me at all.
Yeah.
You may think it's great because you play baseball. In fact, even if the card didn't have, let's say, a physical matter value of, let's say, 20 cents, 30 cents or whatever, you might have been the person on the card.
Yeah.
Like, in which case, this thing is infinite value to me. Yeah, I do think on most of the level that a lot of stuff gets subjective.
If you know each other's preferences, then by and large, it gets a lot less subjective.
Yes, you have an idea of the individual at that point.
Yeah, if you have mutual information about what the other party wants, then actually it gets kind of objective at any given point, because you can know what you can trade for what certain people are going to value and other people aren't. And that's kind of, in some sense, if you look at it, just how the economy works with the buying and selling of goods tailored to individual preferences, to the extent that it can be, and the price of goods eventually sort of reaching an equilibrium of what all these different people want from them and their availability too. But my point is, at its base, I don't know that there actually is much subjectivity there. We choose the values of our currencies and the materials out of which they're made for reasons, and for specific ones that don't vary too much across time. That's my argument.
Well, I agree with the metals part. Yeah. I mean, like the choosing of these metals for the particular reason that these things last for a period of time and the value maintained. No, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I'm just making the point that it's still, on some level, it's any of those things could be the value. I mean, like, you could have a society that is not, let's say, wise and uses something like a rock. But metals, are usually better for that stuff.
And I just don't think we see that happening. We got to close this hour out, and we'll be coming back with headlines. I buy less and less these days the subjectivity argument, but that's a topic for another time, and a much larger one for sure. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be coming back on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for our last hour this week. Not just this morning, but for the entire period of this week, of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more from across these disunited states of America and the increasingly divided, fragmented, embattled, crisis-driven world of ours. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're back. And I hope you're having a great morning, whether you're just joining us or you've been with us for the full thing. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were more than 29,701 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 654 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of 28,933 cases per day. That's a decrease of 36% from the average 2 weeks earlier. The rate of decrease is going up. And I think 36% as a decrease from 2 weeks earlier is actually higher than any of the decreases from 2 weeks earlier that we saw like 6 weeks ago. Remember, there was that on the other side of cold and flu season ending, there was that first decrease where it got up to 20-30%, something like that, for a couple of weeks there, and then it kind of leveled out for a little bit, and now we're on the way back down
to 30. Yeah, and that's good because we're on Friday.
30%, 36% from 2 weeks ago, which I think is a higher decrease.
Yeah,
would be slightly confusing than it was 6 weeks ago, or however long ago when we had that first
the number is getting better. Momentum is increasing in regards to the number decreasing. Yeah,
and faster than it was before. Yeah, which is a good way to be. Anyway, as of this morning, this comes as the coronavirus has infected more than 33 million people total across the United States, also killing about 588,150 people over its course. The UK has pledged its support for a new surveillance network called the Global Pandemic Radar, the purpose of which would be to track coronavirus cases and new strains. It would be directed, and is directed, in fact, in part by the World Health Organization. This comes about a week and a half after the largest independent review of the global handling of the pandemic, which strongly criticized the WHO, the World Health Organization, saying that we could have averted the pandemic entirely if these institutions and countries had acted just a month earlier. Argentina, the country, is starting a strict lockdown this Saturday following 39,000 new cases on Wednesday. In national political news, here back in the States, Biden signed into law yesterday the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act that received overwhelming support from both chambers of Congress. The bill will make it easier to report hate crimes at the local level, make hate crimes reporting easier, and available in more languages at the local level. Federal investigators say they are expanding their investigation into New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. They're expanding it from his administration's cover-up of COVID-19 deaths and who died from COVID-19 specifically, to his acquiring early COVID tests for his close family to use. This new news comes out at the same time as it's been reported that Cuomo acquired early COVID testing for his family in the days following a media outcry over reports that he was already receiving early COVID testing for his family. Anyway, the first round of reports brought up it seemed that Cuomo had procured COVID tests for his family over the course of last year. And then while the report from that was coming out, it has now come out. It seems like Cuomo was still doing that in the days when this had been made a big thing out of in the media. So fingers in the cookie jar while you're being scolded for trying to steal cookies isn't a good way out of it. Anyway, with federal investigators turning their attention to that component, that of course brings up the idea, to what extent is it criminal? And how is Cuomo going to be punished if they find out that he did that? Anyway, in international news, a ceasefire was declared yesterday between Israel and Hamas following almost 2 weeks of armed conflict in that region. The ceasefire was declared with no preconditions. It has been holding for over 12 hours now. And Palestinians have been sharing a hashtag claiming victory. But the question, I think, for us is whether or for how long that ceasefire will hold. Britain's Justice Minister says a review is needed of the BBC after the organization was revealed as having lied to the late Princess Diana in a successful attempt to get an interview with her. The form of that lie was the fabrication of bank statements that gave her a sense that she was being spied on, and it got her into the interview effectively, but also, of course, damaged an already bad state of mind at the time, back in the mid-90s. Japan is considering freezing all aid to Myanmar over the coup government's violent response to protesters. Tokyo has long had ties to the Burmese military, although Myanmar just several days ago fired 2 diplomats in its embassy in Tokyo for rejecting the coup government's claims. And with that, those are our headlines. Hopefully you're continuing to listen to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're back. Jamarl, you wanted to get into Andrew Cuomo, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, and the whole conversation, not just that we've been having for months, but the specific recent one about his family getting early COVID testing.
And we knew about that one. That one was released, I think it was a few weeks ago or a month or so ago. But the new revelation had to do with him basically advising his brother during the time where all of the sexual harassment stuff was taking place. Now, if you remember, Andrew Cuomo came on to the show.
Chris Cuomo show on CNN. Yeah.
Right. Went on to CNN. Yeah. And he goes on to CNN and they laugh it up. They have a huge fun. It's like, oh, look at the COVID stuff. I'm handling COVID stuff extremely well. Come to find out he was lying about it. And now you have this situation where you find out that, yes, he was giving them preferential treatment in regards to, even a police escort, like for the lab results and stuff like that, like if I remember the story correctly. But on this one, we now find out that they were talking behind the scenes. Now, the catch becomes, is it wrong? And more to the point, is it expected whether or not it's wrong?
Is it illegal? Is another question.
Right. I don't think it's legal. It's definitely frowned upon.
Yeah.
But it's his bro. Like if your brother was in a situation, would you advise your brother? I think you would. I guess the catch becomes their issue is lawyers were present. They were talking about it and CNN, that type of stuff.
Yeah, well, but they're also extremely high-profile people. And Andrew Cuomo is the governor of his state, and Chris Cuomo has a news platform and was giving rosy coverage of his brother for months.
During COVID, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But he didn't touch the story.
No, and I'm sure.
And by the way, I'm not saying this is good, so don't. It's not that.
It was a good time for them.
I guess I'm thinking in terms of it's his bro, and isn't it expected that he's going to talk to his brother about this?
Well, but I think in my opinion, actually, the bigger deal that's come out in the last couple of days is the part about how he kept doing it. He kept getting the tests for his family even after he was coming under scrutiny. Because at a certain point, again, it's like, I don't mean to trivialize it, but it's like the kid. Okay, you have your hand in the cookie jar while you're getting. I don't want to make it boring by revisiting the metaphor, but forget it. While you're getting scolded, you already know that it's something you're not supposed to be doing. And you're looking at your mom or your dad like
as you
exactly what facial expression. If you had to think of Cuomo in this case, well, I'm going to keep doing it. I mean, that's not just it's a bit of nepotism.
Yeah,
but it's also why do that while you're being criticized for it? I don't know.
Because
and
he
not
can get away
talking about
with
it,
it.
not defending it.
I mean, I
he
think
can. Is that what you said?
Well, yeah. I mean, he can. I mean, that's the catch. I mean, he's doing it because he can. I'm governor.
But
I have
can he?
family members. My family members matter more. You guys are criticizing me for, going to the bathroom on the couch.
But if he gets criticized for it, is he really getting away with it? If it becomes a thing?
If he keeps doing it, yes. Like for example, like Cuomo, like this is not taking him out of office. I mean, Cuomo got caught and still said, look, my bro, I care about my bro. I'm going to get my bro tested. Didn't matter that you were looking at him. In his head, is it illegal? No, I'm going to do it. That's my bro. Like it could be that level of, that's my family. I love my family. I'll deal with the consequences after the fact. And, the newsman, Chris, same thing, where he's like, that's my bro. I was going to back my bro up. I can't be impartial with my brother.
Well, and what I have on good authority that you haven't heard about, I'm sure yet, is that Andrew Cuomo actually briefly requested that everybody in the state of New York be adopted into the Cuomo family so that he could justify getting everybody. That's how much he actually cared.
Well, I think the problem with it is you were lying about the number of people that were dying in nursing homes while simultaneously getting your family checked and preventing the people in the nursing homes from getting checked. I mean, that was the big issue, right? Where he was like, look, putting down a mandate that says you can't test these people if they're coming into the nursing homes.
Well, and what threw gasoline onto that story was the cover-up. The cover-up became, if any, it became proof of the crime, effectively.
Right.
Yeah. With the AIDS. Because, again, if there hadn't been this thing, we froze when we came under the scrutiny of the DOJ.
Yeah.
If there hadn't been this outright admission, we knew that this was a little bit, we were trying to cover our tracks effectively.
Do you think
then you could just pass it off as, well, different states have different reporting statistics. It was, we'll correct it.
Right there.
But we did, I'm sorry, we weren't aware of it.
Do you think that would have,
that kind of thing,
if he would have just told the numbers, let's say he would have just owned up to, we got all these people killed in New York. Would all of this take place? I mean, is this the issue that it's the cover up?
I don't know. That's not a chicken and egg problem necessarily, but the other thing came first, and it sort of set the stage for this. Because what it does is it makes Cuomo, who had been known as somebody who'd handled this crisis better, suddenly a suspect figure. And we're still in the pandemic. So if he had handled all this well, and then there were some sexual harassment claims, and then this claim that his brother got faster treatment, his parents, his family in general, people are going to be a lot more lenient, because it's like, okay, he's really on top of it. He's doing a good job. Whatever, we'll let it slide. It's like the BB coming under scrutiny for some corruption. Well, it's everybody's corrupt. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of dismissal makes it possible to kind of keep doing that thing. But no, he failed.
Yeah,
he screwed up, effed up, whatever.
Yeah,
and
lied about it.
And
got an Emmy on it. He got his book
and then
money, his stipend for the book thing.
It's one thing after another, and it all comes together.
Yeah.
He's a sexual harasser. He's a liar. He's an authoritarian in his office who likes to keep everybody under control, and that's how he's kept it silent so long. And he's in control of New York's political system.
Yeah.
And he's
abusive,
mob boss style political abusive figure who's as likely to slap you as he is to try to kiss you on your cheek or your face. You know what I mean?
On the lips.
What do you say?
Cuomo is like, kiss me on the lips. I'm Cuomo.
Exactly. That kind of.
Yeah, he's a broken figure at this point. All of this looks bad. I mean, look, if I am a New Yorker and I find out that either my parent, somebody who I knew, or for that matter, just human beings in general, were put into a nursing home and was disallowed from finding out whether or not the person had COVID, and then I find out that you're getting your family preferential treatment. I'm going to be bothered by that.
Should we just ban dynasties in politics, Jamarl?
How do you stop dynasties?
Well, you just prevent family members of previous politicians, particularly recent ones, from taking office. Maybe you put like a 50-year window there. So like after you're 50 years from the most recent,
the next person can come in.
It's actually kind of a problem, in my opinion.
Yeah,
isn't it? I mean, isn't it kind of deepening inequality?
I mean, some of these guys, I mean, like when you get into Bush, Gore, not Gore.
The Bushes, the Romneys.
Right.
You have the Cheneys.
Right.
You have the Cuomos. Clearly,
might get Michelle Obama. She might run
maybe
at some point.
Yeah, I wouldn't actually underplay how much of a problem, because what we also live in is not just an oligarchy, but a gerontocracy that is overwhelmingly run by old people. And how does that work? Well, you have family dynasties, I would say. You have people who are keeping the power in place, who are raising their young to take power.
Yes.
And you even see that with Rudy Giuliani, with his son potentially.
Yes.
Moving in New York, going up against Cuomo.
Whether people realize this or not, one of the things of poverty, and I think one of the most interesting things, has to do with the implicit and the implicit stuff, the stuff that takes place behind the scenes that people don't see, that people don't know. That's just kind of a factor of things that take place as a benefit or as a detriment. Say, for example, you are the child of Clifford Huxtable and Claire Huxtable. They have political connections. They've been to college. Their incentive is for you to go to college because in their head, excellence in education is just a pathway to that. They have the resources necessary for the kid to go on trips, for them as a family to go on trips. Meaning that kid and that experience that kid has growing up is ideal. It's the most ideal that a child can get. Well, what happens if you're living in, let's say, a destitute condition? Let's say it's not even desperate poverty. Let's just say it's a single parent. Well, you don't have the money for the trips. This notion of political connections is not necessarily there. Education may be a way out, but it's certainly not the same thing as having a doctor and a lawyer for that. You know what I mean? Like, there's all sorts of things that are just under the covers in regards to just setups.
Well, the upbringing.
Yeah, just in general, like without the parents even saying anything
you say
explicitly.
Under the covers. But you say under the covers because we like to talk about how we live in a democracy. But of course, the truth is that how oligarchies fundamentally work is you have a cultivated meritocracy.
Right.
An oligarchy is not fundamentally, it's just absolutely corrupt. And you tend to have an elite class that trains their children, they're young, in whatever they're doing.
And they do it naturally, by the way.
It will often degrade over time, but it doesn't mean that the people who are put in those positions are going to be the worst leaders. Probably they're going to be above average because they were trained for them. But the problem about it is the often genetically enforced, like the literal lineages of power of certain people holding up certain positions for decades or centuries, and centuries quite often. What do you say?
You said centuries?
Yes.
Who are the centuries?
Individual families at the heads of royal houses.
I see.
And the various nobility within these countries. That is an aristocracy, which is a form of oligarchy, I would say.
Yeah.
And, that's how it works for everybody, too. That's how it works for us. That's why you're talking about, the politicians, we like to sweep it under the rug because, again, we like to talk about how we live in a democracy. Functionally, we live in an oligarchy that is showing more signs of becoming an aristocracy as more families take up more power and train their kids to become the future's politicians.
The thing is, that training, though, is almost implicit. That's the point that I'm getting. Like, it may be explicit, so don't misunderstand me. But oftentimes, just me being there in and of itself is
that is training.
Yeah, and as opposed to me, let's say, growing up.
And it is genuine training.
It's training,
but that doesn't mean that doesn't, because then what are you justifying with that?
I'm not saying that
from
birth
politicians? Should we elect them or should we just train them into place? If you take that argument to one of its extremes.
No, I'm not saying that that's right. I'm saying it is. If that makes sense. Like, it's like the parents do that. Even if the child wasn't explicitly trained to be a lawyer or doctor or whatever else, the very fact that the dad is one or that the mom is one in and of itself incentivizes, or at the very least gives this kind of point of view or pathway of action.
In
a particular direction. But that doesn't mean you should forcibly, that you should have dynasties.
It's 10 trillion% agree with you.
Yeah.
And some people would argue that means that you should have dynasties. I am not coincidentally one of those people. But there are legitimately some fringe people out there who are like pro-aristocracy because they're like, you can train them, stability, but you can train them into the place. Yeah. And if you have a cultivated aristocratic class, there are people who can make those kinds of arguments. Again, I'm not one of them. I prefer localism. And here's the other side of this. Here's one natural response to it. This is part of why you might try to create an actual functioning education system as part of liberal society that we pride ourselves on.
Because you would need those dynasties. I mean, like that process.
If everybody, if you give everybody the base of education that they would need to specialize slightly and pick up the attributes of a leader, if everybody has that, then think about what that society looks like. If nobility of the heart is not just restricted to the nobility by law, but if everybody has access to this broad basis of what it means to be at that level, think about how our society would look.
It would be very different. I mean, the catch is, how do you bring up kids in a situation like that when the parents aren't in the situation?
Yeah.
And I know what you mean from the standpoint of an education system. Yeah. Functioning education system I would make a case. This is part of the reason the education system is there, is so that nepotism doesn't, perpetuate itself.
Yeah, that could be part of it. But here's the thing, man. My modified position, I grew up being unschooled and homeschooled. And when I was 19, my first big thing became, anti-education. I really didn't like how public school specifically worked. And then I kind of expanded into the universities. But if you look at it, other than, okay, you would have monasteries for religious education. You eventually had the rise of some universities in Europe and around the world, madrasas, the Middle East and other parts of the world that would train, certain members of certain classes. But it's really only within the last couple of centuries that you see universal public education and attempts at universal public education. And from what I can tell, every one of those attempts has all happened with the whole way the wave started was during the industrial era, looking to take parents who had previously been effectively serfs in these feudal societies and were now newly moving into cities and having to work wage-paying jobs where they wouldn't be able to take care of their kids. How to train the massive kids.
Right.
You can think of Oliver Swift or whatever, some of these... we
need robots.
Ragamuffin-y type people, trying to train them into some sort of functioning. You say we need robots. I think we need a renewed sense of what it means to be a human being in our economy and in our society, and how, if you were able to unleash this wave of productivity, innovation, ingenuity, creativity, all these things that I'm talking about, instead of rote labor paid by the hour, think about where we could be, Jamarl.
Yes, I think it would be a phenomenal thing. Like I said, though, our issue is consciousness. Like trying to get out of these finger traps that we found ourselves into that are just conceptual. I mean, if you think about, for example, like we talk about the $15 an hour minimum wage and how machines get to the point of, being cheaper, in which case people are putting themselves out of work, or even like the automation in regards to cars and whatnot. Yeah. I mean, a lot of that stuff is a consciousness thing. We have the tools, we have the technical know-how, we have the scientific understanding of our world. Yeah, there doesn't need to be anybody hungry. There doesn't need to be anybody without a house. And yeah, our innovation and our capacity to grow and expand could be phenomenal. How do we get there is a question.
It's true. All right, let's go to a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're coming back with our next guest, Daniel Lazar, talking about Russiagate and I'm sure much more. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines. Be right back on the other side of the short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So Aaron Matei has been extremely strong on this notion of Russiagate and pushing back against it. And he's recently been able to have a conversation with Klimnik, the person who's basically at the core of this new Russiagate scandal, or this, let's say, keeping it alive during the Biden administration. If you remember this question about Afghanistan and whether or not Russians were paying Afghans or Taliban in order to kill Americans, well, Joe Biden immediately said, well, that's not true, in which case the media ignores it. But he does come out with another conspiracy theory talking about Kalimnik, the person who's supposed to be the linchpin of the Trump-Russia stuff. He does bring about that and brings another conspiracy theory regarding Donald Trump and Kalimnik. In order to have a conversation about this, we're joined with Daniel Lazar. Daniel Lazar is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written a number of books, including From Moses to ISIS, The Intelligent Heretic's Guide to Monotheism, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, thank you for joining us. How's it going, man?
It's going fine. How are you?
We are doing all right. We're making it. We're back in the office now, so things are, we're back in the office. Things are going well. I can't complain. So I wanted to get into this conversation. Aaron Matei brings this up. He's been one of the strongest fighters pushing back on the notion of Russiagate, and this question of Kalimnik came up, and Kalimnik's role in the quote-unquote Russiagate scandal. Now, two things have been said at this point. There was one that was said by Mueller, and there was something else that was said basically by the Biden administration, and those two things clashed. So let's start at the beginning. Who is Kalimnik, and what role does Kalimnik have in the conspiracy, the never-dying conspiracy that is Russiagate?
Okay. Well, Konstantin Kalimnik is a Russian national. He is a graduate of a 5-year language course at a Russian military school, or Soviet military school at the time, where he learned to speak fluent English and Swedish. He then went to work and used his English skills to parlay various jobs. One of which was as an aide to Paul Manafort, the famous fixer, influence peddler, and for several months Trump's campaign manager in 2016. And then Russiagate came along. And suddenly, Kalimnik went from being an obscure guy, an aide to an aide. He went from being from that to a international spy, election interferer, colluder, et cetera, and all around, bad guy, et cetera. So that's who he is. And let me just explain. Russiagate is a sprawling conspiracy theory with all kinds of ins and outs and complicated details. And in order to make this theory work, you've got to sort of squeeze the square peg into the round hole and make the various details fit. And in this case, in most cases, that involves shaving the edges, kind of distorting the content of the information, leaving certain facts out, so that it all seems to hang together.
Well,
but it clearly doesn't, and that is the point of Aaron Matei's article, his interview with Kalimnik.
Yeah, Kalimnik makes the point of saying that he didn't pass any polling data. He also makes the point of saying they needed a Russian to make the Russian collusion thing stick, and he was that particular person. He also makes the point of saying he shared publicly available general information about the 2016 American presidential race to Ukrainian clients of Manafort's in a bid to recover debts and drum up new business. Basically, they are misrepresenting what I was doing and who I was. Also, he made the point of saying, no U.S. government official has ever tried to get in touch with him. Quote, I have never had a single contact with the FBI or any government official, Kalimnik says, unquote. So, this is basically the extension of Russiagate. They just don't want it to die. And so this is their way of trying to keep this alive. And they jump on to a whole nother conspiracy theory on this front. From your standpoint, has anything surprised you on this with the Kalimnik interview? Meaning, did he say anything in this interview or this kind of conversation where you were surprised by something that you didn't necessarily know before, something that is challenging an aspect of the Russiagate thing that you weren't aware of before? Is there anything new in this that you didn't necessarily know?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. There's a good deal new. I'm not surprised, but there's a good deal new.
I mean, for example, the Mueller investigation says that he used a diplomatic passport to enter the United States, and that's important because Russian intelligence agents usually travel with a diplomatic passport. So that in itself would be a certain indication that he was indeed an intelligence agent. But he showed he sent an image of it to Aaron of his passport, and lo and behold, it's a standard, plain old civilian passport. So there is no indication of a diplomatic passport. It's only an indication of a civilian passport, and that's very important. The other thing that's important is the Mueller investigation has him traveling to Madrid to meet with Paul Manafort, his boss. And in fact, it was Manafort's alleged lie about that meeting that led to his, incarceration. And he says he did not travel to Madrid. And he says that that if he's lying, evidence to that effect should be very easy to turn out, travel documents, customs agents, etc. But that the Mueller team made no effort to come up with any evidence putting him in Madrid at that time for the meeting with Manafort. So it's more evidence that sort of shows that this whole Mueller investigation just doesn't hang together. I mean, it's just a mass of details which really don't fit, are really unconvincing, and in certain specific, aspects, they just fall apart under close inspection. This is the really important thing. This whole Russiagate story was a monumental con job.
Yes. Well, and here's another, those like procedural crime shows that you can watch where every episode they'll go through a new criminal case. And there's some that do series-long cases or multi-episode cases, whatever. It would be fascinating to see the behind-the-scenes, the Mueller investigation version of that. Because at a certain point, usually what happens is they're talking about competing theories. They're trying to come up with one. And this one, like you're saying, they were able to come up with, but it's all these loose threads, all these open threads that if you imagine them there, they could support something that's not clearly defined. But in isolation, it seems like this is another one of those loose ends, loose threads that they're trying to tie up. But does this still have currency? There's no idea. We have no idea where the Treasury Department got the claim. There isn't any outside backing against Kalimnik, but it's still going. Before we close here, Daniel, thank you for joining us. What other open threads do you see in and from the Mueller investigation? What else is actually out there for us to be talking about, for them to be investigating, that's still hanging?
Well, it's always generating new threads. It's a self-perpetuating, phenomenon. The Russian bounty story was a kind of a Russiagate spinoff.
That seems fairly debunked, although who knows if even that has legs to come back. But it seems like they issued the retraction saying they never had real reason to believe that it was all just estimates of confidence and not certainty.
But it had legs for a long time.
That's true.
I mean, the New York Times published front page stories, over and over. Biden endorsed the theory during one of his debates with Trump. Now they're backing away from it. Now, 6 or 10 months later, they're edging away from the theory. But it had legs. It was really causing problems.
And it's interesting the kinds of mistakes that can get away from us. I mean, some people say something stupid online a decade ago, and it comes back to haunt them with a mass mob chasing them to the end of the earth, and then a major news outlet gets something grievously wrong, influences the public's decision-making across the board, influences what government, what contenders for the seat of government do, and what government itself does over time. And then, it turns out they lied about it or they got it wrong, and they never pays the music for it. That never happens, Daniel.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct. I mean, and I guess the latest example, it's not quite Russiagate, but it's kind of very close in spirit and methodology, is the Uyghur genocide campaign or anti-genocide campaign. This charge was
plucked out of thin air. It was manufactured by a far right-wing German theologian named Adrian Zenz. It was endorsed immediately both by Mike Pompeo and, at the time, the Biden campaign team.
And then picked up by Blinken. Yep.
And Blinken, yeah. And now apparently it's still as holy writ as far as the U.S. government is concerned.
That's true.
Now, and I'm not saying that all is well in Xinjiang, where where 12 million Uyghurs live, but there is no evidence whatsoever of genocide, and it's ridiculous. But yet this story has legs too, in the same way that Russiagate, Russian bounties, etc. And you just can't kill it because when you disprove it, they said maybe they walk it back, and then they put out another theory that's equally preposterous, which the press then jumps on and develops.
And what's frustrating, we need to close, so I'm going to close this after I say this short bit. And we'll be bringing you back. But what's frustrating to me about this? Okay, the threat of world war, the threat of nuclear, Armageddon, all of that stuff, that's in the running somewhere. But what's frustrating to me is how much bellicosity there is rhetorically. And at the end of the day, on the back end, how much we still do business with both these other significant players, Russia, Iran. It's all of this noise, all of this smoke, and like the tiniest bit of fire. And I'm not saying I want more fire. I want the smoke to stop because it has all these other deleterious effects on our society. I'll give you a for instance, or a specific example before we go into the break. Again, all of the constant pushback, yet we import crude oil from Russia in ginormous quantities. And Trump, if anything, was harder on Russia than Obama was there for a little while until the Euromaidan thing. And even then Biden is so far with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, that waiving the sanctions on that. It's weird. The whole Trump thing, all of Russiagate, of course, what we were talking about here, felt like a massive attempt, at least in part, to keep Trump from any rapprochement, any unnecessary closeness from the American foreign policy establishment's perspective with Russia. And they successfully did that, where Trump was not a hawk necessarily, but kind of hawkish in a couple of key ways. And Biden, despite that, just keeping it all up. Now, I don't think, and certainly don't want, that we're going to see a war anytime soon. But it's again, so much smoke and so little fire. It feels like it's all a lie and a distraction, and it has these horrible spillover effects into society in general. And our conversation. We need to go into a break, though. We're joined by Daniel Lazar, coming back with him on the other side. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays, when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So, a January 6th commission that push on the Capitol. And the catch becomes, what happened? How did it happen? Was people who are in Congress associated with the attack on the Capitol itself? Those are all sorts of questions. And there was an agreement to have a bipartisan commission to come together in order to study this. Well, that agreement has fallen through with McCarthy and McConnell basically saying no dice. Now, there's all sorts of reasons why they may be doing this, but at the end of the day, something dramatic happened to this country. And the idea that the Republican Party is backing out of the investigation may, me think the lady do protest too much. By the same token, we're going to have a conversation in regards to why they may be doing this, what they may be trying to hide. Are they trying to hide anything at all? And for that matter, the influence of Donald Trump in this particular decision, just like the decision for that matter to get rid of Cheney. I think all of these things are related. To have a conversation, we're joined with Daniel Lazar. Daniel Lazar is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written a number of books, including From Moses to ISIS, The Intelligent Heretic's Guide to Monotheism, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, once again, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So what do you think about this? I mean, basically, look, personally, I think they should have a convention. I think they should have an investigation. I think we should know whether or not there were people in Congress or that was working with members of Congress that was directly related to the people who basically attacked the Capitol. And I don't know how something like that could drown out our media space for weeks on end, could change the face of literally Washington, D.C. in regards to the barbed wires, the railings, the fences, the gates. For something to have that dramatic of an effect, and then to say, okay, yeah, we don't want to investigate. Yeah, that's a fail. What are your thoughts on this? I know you're a critic of the American Constitution in general, but within the context of these guys running and making a run on the Capitol, I mean, how do you view this? Is this something that they should have? You don't think there's a point in them having it? Or do you think it's one of those things where whether you have the commission or not, it's almost always going to be political theater? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think first of all they should have an investigation, absolutely, and I think the problem is we have the Republican Party has more or less kind of sort of semi-endorsed the insurrection. They're waffling. They don't want to come out and say it, but they certainly don't want to criticize the insurrection because their leader, Donald Trump, led the attack, and the majority of Republican voters more or less support it. So we have a two-party system, but one of the parties is moving in an ever more anti-democratic direction. That is the problem, really. And that's a very dangerous development.
I agree with you.
I hear you, but I think what the Republicans are, of course, worried about here is the politicization of the investigation, which I also don't doubt would happen.
Yeah.
It becoming, to use Donald Trump's phrase, merely a Democrat-run witch hunt. Daniel, do you see any possibility of something like that being the case?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The possibility. I'm absolutely certain it would happen. I mean, the Democrats are. I mean, the utter incompetence and mendacity of the Democrats is not to be, underestimated. It's incredible.
And using the legal system as a political tool, the lawfare in general, it's kind of become their thing.
Yeah, but we still should have an investigation because people should know what happened. Was there actual Republican collusion with the insurrectionists? And what did Donald Trump know, and when did he know it?
Yeah, that's a big deal.
That would be very, very important to find out. But it's the kind of but the Republicans don't want to find that out.
Is it possible?
They want to bury the details.
Is it possible to even have an independent commission or non-biased or non-partisan commission? And the reason I'm asking this is because, look, there's something that I would say this should go beyond just partisanship. This should go to this thing of America in and of itself, in these, in the flag waving sense of the word. And in doing so, trying to figure out, okay, what happened? But going beyond just the notion of what happened, I mean, even getting to the crux of why did they raid the place in the first place, even if Donald Trump pushed them to do it? Was it entirely and specifically only related to the notion that the election was being stolen, or were there things that were undergirding this notion of the election being stolen? Yeah, I think the investigation should go extremely far into it. Is it possible to even set up an independent commission, though? I mean, because, yes, I think it's going to be partisan, but it's a secondary question of whether or not they can make it non-biased.
I mean, I think you're right. It is questionable, but I would like to see them try. What happened on January 6th? I mean, have you remember that the Capitol Hill has been the scene of trench warfare going back to Newt Gingrich's contract with America in 1994, 95. This is a full 25 years of a Cold War in Capitol Hill. And so finally on January 6th, things exploded. And it was a 25-year buildup, and it was inevitable that something like that would happen because the way the U.S. system is constructed is that it's a log jam machine. It creates bottlenecks and log jams in Congress because the system allows tiny minorities to essentially shut down the legislative process.
And we know your take on this. Daniel, we are very familiar with your take on how we talked about it extensively on the show before too. The Constitution is set up and problems with it, and the process of reforming it, and what that could look like. We often will get lodged in that conversation. We'll keep that one going.
Okay.
Which is why we have successfully so far not gotten stuck in that, because it's kind of like a honeypot for a certain kind of person asking, certain kinds of questions about the endless conversations you can have back and forth on that. We've gone over that many times. But here's the thing: with you can't keep it from being politicized. To answer Jamarl's question, no, you cannot keep it independent. But isn't it also obvious, though, having had the conversation we just have? Okay, so it's going to be politicized, but you should have some investigation. Or should we still be looking? And I guess yes, technically, but should we still be caught up in the past, or does this show that the Democrats are not really prepared for how to respond to a Republican Party that is still decidedly against the results of this last election, that has potency and strength, and that has a viable shot at something in the midterms in 2024? Well, the whole thing I'm asking here is what this is going to become is Democrats sort of trying to wring the Republican Party out in public for as many months as they can, getting as many narratives frontlined as they possibly can, and trying to drag them down. Not even timed particularly well for the midterms unless they're able to extend it for a full year and a half or whatever. But they're going to be using it that way. And then the Republicans are going to be trying to dismiss as much as they possibly can, but really probably successfully marshaling for the next round of elections. Daniel, do you see this as even a successful tactic? What's your take?
Oh yeah, first of all, it could work for the Republicans. It could work. The same thing could work for it could work for the Democrats, and the same thing could work for the Republicans. The Democrats want to use the legislative process to hang the Republicans out to dry.
It just seems to me like not an extension of Russiagate specifically, but it seems to me like an extension of the same type of politics that the Democrats have unsuccessfully, in my opinion, been wielding. Biden, by any metric, based on how Trump handled the pandemic and just the state of affairs, the constant media onslaught against Trump, for good, for better, and for worse, Democrats should have been able to win this last presidential election handily. Yet, not only is there a doubt, but the margins weren't even that great between Trump and Biden at the end of the day. It could have been a lot stronger than it actually was. My point is this seems to be a failing tactic, but the Democrats are pursuing these kinds of long, drawn-out legislative, political witch hunts, to use the word again. Is that, if you consider that over multiple iterations, is that a valid strategy on their part, or is that a grievous mistake?
Well, first of all, the election was not close. Nationwide, Biden's margin was 7 million popular votes. That's actually a very big margin. You're quite correct that in 3 states there was very, very narrow.
Yeah, and of course that's the whole Michigan, electoral politics. But even if you look at the Senate, again, technically Democrats have the tiebreaker, but in the Senate they barely won the tie-broken majority, and in the House they didn't get as many seats as they thought they would. Georgia notwithstanding, the surprise coming out of Georgia.
Well, that was the problem, that the Democrats concentrated so much fire on Trump and so much personal vilification that there was a reverse coattails effect. People voted against Trump, but they still voted Republican. So therefore, the Democrats did very poorly in congressional elections for both the House and Senate. And so therefore, you wind up with a very weak and tenuous Democratic hold on either House of Congress, which the Republicans will exploit to the maximum. You ask if these strategies are effective or not. They have no choice but to use these strategies.
Why do you say that?
They're like actors in a play. They're given a script, and they have to read the script.
Well, is the script
dictates the?
That's what I was going to ask. It's the script? Incentivized by the system itself.
Who hands them a script? Where does the script come from, Daniel?
It comes from the system. It arises out of the system. The system says that in response to Trump doing this, you got to pillory Trump.
But when you say the system,
and discredit him.
Yeah.
When you say the system, are you talking about the system in the? What do you mean by the system? I don't mean to drill down too much, but are you talking about specific people or a general sense they're getting?
I mean the very structure of how Congress works essentially dictates how individuals within that structure operate.
Basically like matter following gravity.
I hear you, but I guess I can say that about so many things, and if it doesn't explain so much as it explains away. In other words, I could say the conversation we're having right now is dictated by the neurological laws, the physiology of the human brain, but that doesn't explain why we're talking about this or why we're talking about this in this way. It's almost like a general thing. I don't mean to nitpick. I guess I was trying to figure out who specifically you were talking about or who they were getting the messages from, because I see this as a strategy that they are choosing. I don't see it as inevitable or intrinsic or anything like that. The Republicans, if they wanted to, could choose something that would be a lot more valid and effective, in my opinion. But
it's inevitable that Mitch McConnell will make the most of his razor thin hold on the Senate, and it's inevitable that the Democrats will not move against the filibuster because they don't have the votes, and so also this deadlock which is persisting in the Senate means that the various players will all sort of orient themselves to that, and therefore will follow a script that essentially arises as a consequence of that deadlock. We know how the Republicans will respond because it's clear and obvious what they've got to do, and the same goes to the Democrats. So they really have been handed a script, with laugh lines and applause lines and prompts, etc. They've got to follow the script because the system, is in control. I know this sounds something called a paradox of determinism, and this sounds like that, but it is actually in this case true. The American political system is on autopilot. And the people who operate within it do not think for themselves. They do what the system demands of them. I have spent the last 25 years of my life trying to make this point. And this is what is so mindless and disastrous about American politics.
Well, I understand it. You're basically saying that they are incentivized to behave a particular way based on the conditions on the ground, that they are pushed to act based on the advantages, based on what they consider to be a success and a victory. I think Shane's point, though, is somewhat apt. Just because they had to generally respond and push back, it doesn't necessarily dictate the specific way in which you're doing it. Like, they could choose, like right now, for example, perfect example. The Republican Party has decided we're going in the direction of Trump. That's what we're going to do. We've decided, Republican Party, that the ground is shifting below us, that the country, for the most part, has issues associated either with poverty, with difficulty. I mean, for God's sake, you had protests going all year. You had a putsch on the Capitol. So it seems like the political parties, whether they're overtly talking about it or not, have made a choice of saying, okay, something needs to change. Well, the Republican Party has assumed we're going to go in the direction of Trump. Trump got all of these additional votes. Trump was able to get blacks. He was able to get Hispanics. That's the fastest train moving, not to mention the money and everything else. They're choosing that. They didn't have to choose that. Liz Cheney chose to go a different tack. Now, they could have chose to go in a particular direction, but not push back on the election in the way that they did. They could chose to go in a direction and still go for the January 6th. I mean, I guess my point is they're making choices, even with Democrats. They didn't have to push the Russiagate stuff. They chose that as the fastest thinking thing moving in order to undermine Trump. And even now, where they're attacking, I mean, explain that. I'll let you respond to that because we don't have too much time left.
Well, first of all, the Republicans have no choice but to stick with Trump. I mean, Trump is this outsized figure, this domineering personality, right? And members of Congress are beholden to their constituents because Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution says they must do that. And so, therefore, there's a bunch of Lilliputians on Capitol Hill, and you have this one guy, this domineering national personality, who is a proven vote getter in some ways, as you point out, did very well in 2020 with minorities, made clear breakthroughs with Hispanics and to a certain extent with blacks as well. So it's very important to them. They can't abandon Trump now. They can't abandon him in midstream. They've got to stick by him. And similarly, the Democrats have got to do everything in their power to somehow debunk, discredit, disqualify Trump.
But do you really, okay, because if I were to look at that sort of plainly, the claim would be the Republicans who, as a political grouping, were broadly in Congress that day, were attacked by Trump supporters at Trump's direction. That's the official narrative out there that a lot of people more or less buy into. So Trump asked his base to attack the Republican Party along with the Democrat Party, and specifically Pence. That's the narrative right now. Do you see any big holes in that, or is it just that political expedience justifies it for the Republicans? Because that kind of doesn't make sense to me, but I don't know exactly what I'm missing here. Daniel, what's your take?
Yeah, I see political expedience. I mean, yes, those guys were running for their lives on January 6th, and if the mob had gotten a hold of Mike Pence, we don't know what would have happened.
But then, quite literally, do you see this as just Trump holding the gun to their heads in some sense? Because there's a physical, obvious threat on January 6th. Do you see it that way?
I think is he holding to a gun to their heads? Yes, in a certain sense. Obviously not literally, but figuratively he is.
Well, kind of semi-literally, because again, if it was a violent threat, that is the claim, is that this was not just an attempted insurrection in a whimsical circus-like sense, a simulation of one, but an actual attempt at one. That would be violent. I get, you know what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he did. Yeah, I think Mike Pence, he essentially was, threatening Mike Pence in a very physical sense. And if the mob had caught Mike Pence, we don't know what would have happened, but there's every reason to fear he would have been, somehow harmed.
And I'm going to stop. I keep driving you with questions, and so I'm not trying to be too incisive or aggressive with how I'm asking him exactly. But it seems to me, it seems to me, if you think about Liz Cheney for a second, if you see Trump as holding the Republican Party as a whole hostage with a mob of people using them as a threat, on the one hand, that's just Democratic politics. On the other, you can understand why Liz Cheney might want to leave it, but to me that seems hyperbolic. I don't see Trump suborning violence on January 6th. I see a small but damn significant subsector of the people out protesting deciding to get violent and deciding to take advantage and sort of jump onto it and not just get violent, but more on a more baseline perspective, enjoy themselves in the Capitol building, kind of experiment a little bit. But I don't see Trump trying to kill his co-workers effectively, and that seems to be the strong implication of what's being said about it here, of what's being said about it. Do you think that Trump intended any harm? Maybe that's a slightly more modified way of putting it, Daniel. Did he intend any physical grievous violence to anybody?
I think the best way of putting it is that he's a reckless driver who was driving, drunk at 60 miles an hour down a crowded street. Did he actually intend to kill anybody? Perhaps not. But did he wind up killing people, and should he have known the consequences of his action? Yes, definitely.
Yeah, if I throw a rock over the underpass, it hits a car and the guy dies, I'm going to jail. That it's that on some level, where regardless of whatever Trump was intending, we see the results of those actions. Do you think? And I suppose we can end it on this question. But what do you think happens from here on out? If Joe Biden is not going to get rid of the filibuster, that means Joe Biden is going to have a difficult time, if at all, getting his policies through. We have a midterm that is coming up. Democrats they could potentially lose the House. They could even potentially lose the Senate coming up this time around. How do you foresee this taking place? Despite the different tact and language that Biden and the Republicans have been using.
I think the Republicans are hoping they're going to use their powers in Congress to screw Biden up, and they're hoping in the meantime that the economy there'll be an economic crisis which Biden will mishandle. Biden has gotten himself in deep doo-doo in Afghanistan. Extricating the U.S. from Afghanistan will not be easy, contrary to what everyone thinks. It's going to be a very painful process with a lot of blowback back home. So the Republicans want to watch him rise, and that is the best way that they figure they can win in 2022. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable strategy as it goes.
The voice,
and if they win in 2022, then they'll be well positioned for the big battle in 2024.
The voice that you guys are listening to is an independent journalist and author, best known critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written a number of books, from Moses to ISIS, The Intelligent Heretic's Guide to Monotheism, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. I'm talking about, of course, Daniel Lazare. You can follow Daniel on Twitter at DHLazare and find his column on the weeklyworker.co.uk, strategic-culture.org, and many others. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Daniel, thank you. Yeah, Daniel, thank you for this, man. I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
Excellent.
Absolutely good conversation.
Yeah.
And we're almost to the close. Unfortunately, as folks can tell, we did not do our call-in segment at the end of the show this morning. So if you wanted to speak with us, your last best chance this week was at 8:45. Gotten into an extended conversation, and it's just interesting because for me, for some reason, I'm seeing this differently than I have for a while now. Which is, okay, wait, what's actually being said here? The claim by the media is that Trump got his supporters to violently attack Congress in an attempt to overthrow the results of the election, and really with it the government, and keep him in office. That's the claim, right?
Yes.
Well, then what's being done with Republicans right now? Then, if you carry that forward, is Republicans are being held hostage and forced to support Trump because it was clear on that day that Trump was able to get his supporters out and acting against these people. That Trump is holding them, which is really, if you think about it, kind of actually